Hey, hey everyone. How you all doing? My cat may be a little bit noisy because unfortunately I didn't and wasn't able to get the cat actually out of the room, and I thought I'd leave the door open, but you got to look after the animals, right? You got to look after the animals. Right, so you're all here for a particular thing, and that's because we're going to be doing a review of a debate that I watched on Dylan Burns's channel. I actually watch him quite regularly, believe it or not. And I also watched a review of there is a kitty. There is a kitty. I'll leave that to next time, chat. Okay. In actual fact, one of the little videos that I've done that I probably will be putting up soon will have him actually walking around the back of me and sniffing the back of my hair, because everybody has a thing with my hair for some reason. So great for me. Was watching Dylan Burns and watching the actual thing on his channel. And I also watched Destiny's stream of it and how he went through it as well. I have some different points of view on it, but some of them are unfortunately going to be the same, which is the whole reason why I've actually linked Destiny's stream down at the bottom. But one of the main things that I actually wanted to talk about before we actually get into the actual stream and rewatching it and going through it and doing a review is that I really wanted to talk about the idea of, is it ethical? Is it right to platform somebody like Lauren Southern? Now, whether you're far right or far left, in between, wherever you fall on the actual political spectrum, it doesn't really matter at that point. Because, Lauren Southern has done some crazy and stupid things. And before anybody goes, no, I'm never, ever going to defend anything that Lauren Southern has ever done, simply because I disagree with the ways in which she's done it. She brought up points that could be addressed. I don't necessarily believe that the way that she went about addressing them or trying to get the conversation going was the right way of doing it. But that aspect and that precursor, when you come into the, seems at least to completely and utterly throw off the whole of the debate topic. If the debate topic is something along the lines of what this is, which was about Canadian reservation schools and about how they've, well, let's be honest, how they've mistreated the Indigenous people of Canada and how that they have been severely underfunded, and how the debate topic was, is that a cultural or actual genocide, with so on and so forth. So that's an important topic, right? Like, whether you want to say there is or it isn't, it's a very important topic. So you'd want to focus on that topic, where people that I've seen on Twitter and on Facebook and on all these other platforms have all been talking about the aspect of, oh, platforming Lauren Southern is good or bad and everything else like that, which, fine, that's a debate that you can have. Is it ethical to actually have somebody like Lauren Southern on your channel? I get that, and that's absolutely fine. That's a debate that you can have. But it doesn't actually focus on what the actual debate topic is. The debate topic was obviously what I just said before about the schools and how Canada has actually mistreated them and so on and so forth, and if they have, and so on and so forth. And because of Lauren Southern, the topic has been completely and utterly erased. The topic doesn't matter anymore. Like we're doing here, we're now trying to go through what Lauren Southern did. Did Dylan Burns moderate properly? Did the Serfs are a tale of two wars actually have intelligent input in this conversation? All these questions probably won't ever get answered, especially by somebody like me, because it's normally answered by a consensus and looking at things in retrospective. So let's try and have a look at it in retrospect and try and see how, what, where, and why things actually happened. Because that's the reason why I wanted to do this debate. I say debate, this review, simply because Lauren Southern's name is completely not going to besmirch the whole topic. Everything's been about her rather than it being about the topic. Now, I'm not going to debate the topic. I do not know the topic enough. If you have a look in the description box for this, you will see that there is a Google Docs that is there for everybody to look at. You can print it off if you so want to and whatnot. I have linked to all the documentation that you will need to have a read through it and what everybody actually cites all the way through, including video sources and so on and so forth. So if you want to do that and want to follow along and try and keep in contact with what's going on with the conversation in just a couple of minutes when we start, then by all means, please do, because it's linked in there for that reason. Right, I suppose we should get to the actual thing, shouldn't we? We should, shouldn't we? Right? We should. So I'm gonna play little bits and pieces of this and see how everything goes. Let me know how you guys are in the chat and everything else like that. Okay, so let's do this, shall we?
I would like to welcome everybody to this event. I was brought in about 2 days ago.
So for people that don't know, starting from the top left-hand corner, as if you were looking up where the Serfs debate, Lauren Southern on Canadian genocide, in that top left-hand corner underneath Lauren Southern bit there, you can see that you have the Serfs, or Lance. To the right, which is interestingly placed, but to the right of Lance, in the far right, you have Lauren Southern. Underneath Lauren Southern, you have a gentleman called Counterpoints. He's actually quite good at this debate. He is centre-right, as far as I'm aware. He's more centre than right-leaning, but he says he's more centre-right. I hope I'm classifying him correctly. And in the bottom left-hand corner, you have somebody called A Tale of Two Wolves, who after this debate, because they did so badly, privated their Twitter because they didn't want to deal with the aftermath of doing so badly in this debate. And obviously, as moderator, you have Dylan Burns. So now that we've got through that, let's carry on and do with the introductions.
But I'm happy to host it. It is going to be on a host of issues. Many of them Canadian-centric, so as an American, I'm going to feel a little left out of the subject.
Thank you very much, Jensen, for letting me know. There may be a problem with that. I may have shared this without the actual. Yeah. I don't think. Let's try that again, shall we? There we go. Hopefully, this will sound a bit better.
Matter. Are bacon still better? I'm going to go over a few of the basic rules.
Let me know if
show.
everybody can hear
that. A little different than most,
please.
I'm a more aggressive moderator than most. If people are interrupting too much, I will go in to make sure that people can clarify their positions and points. So if there is ever a point where I think there's too much chaos going on, I'm not going to let it be blood sporty. I will jump in to assert myself. When I'm talking, it is not to make a point. I'm not going to randomly come in to make fun of Lauren Southern for playing League of Legends. I will just come in.
The worst thing I've done.
It is the worst thing you've done. So I am going to.
I mean, I actually thought that was kind of interesting because it's trying to show that there's common ground, and she's trying to make a joke about herself, so on and so forth. Obviously, within Twitch sphere, League of Legends players are the butt of every joke, so to speak. So I thought that was actually quite good. Personally, it kind of showed a human side, if you want to put it like that. But as you can see, Counterpoints, the gentleman down below in a red t-shirt, is actually laughing at it because he got the reference. Lance in the top left, I mean, I don't know what Lance is doing there. I would like to say he's trying to prepare, but I've seen this before. I've seen this before. So let's carry on.
Purely be moderating. Now, my rules include, of course, nothing against terms of service. I would like to keep my job. Please do not delete my job from the internet. The second rule is we will not be attacking
if people can hear this properly. I'm actually going to speed it up a little bit. That way we can get past a little bit, and I'll put it back down again as well. Otherwise, we'll be here all fucking day. Because all this is just a little bit of an introduction.
His belief in whatever weird religions in Warhammer 40K, he cannot do that. It is not allowed. Another rule of mine is that no slurs are allowed on my show because I find them unpleasant and not productive for conversation. I don't encourage you not to. I don't think it's productive, and I think it makes you look silly. So that's just my tip from me to you. Other than that, we will have a 2-minute intro and 2-minute outro segment. So if you prepare for a longer intro, you can use some of that prepared content for probably your outro, if you thought it was going to be 5 minutes, for example. Is there anything I'm missing from normal rules? Oh, one last thing. I have a chess timer. This is different from most debates, where I will keep track of, I know it's of both sides, how much time to use. So if later in the discussion people are trying to get in and I see that one time has gotten an inordinate amount of time in comparison to the other, I will make sure to give one side a few more speaking opportunities so we can balance it out more so each side is represented. Is there
everybody needs to take notice of what Dylan just said there. He was pointing out at the beginning of the debate that the rules are slightly different in the fact that they have what they call a chess timer. So in other words, what you would do on a chessboard is when you're playing against somebody else, you would have necessarily either a time limit or a maximum amount of time in which you would be able to play a game, say 20 minutes. And each time that you take time to choose a move comes off of your 20 minutes, so to speak. So this is what's happening in this debate. They're actually monitoring the time in how long the two sides are actually debating or speaking. And let's just say that this will come very, very relevant later on during the debate. So let's carry on with open intros, I suppose.
any questions about any of the rules that need to be clarified?
Nope.
Okay.
All good, Chief.
Wonderful. Did somebody just start streaming?
That's my fault.
Oh, no problem.
I
Okay.
have corrected.
So before we do the intros, I just want everybody to introduce themselves. I don't want to whittle down your time for your prepared statements, so I'm going to give it to Connor to introduce themselves and shout themselves out first.
Yeah, hi guys, my name's Connor. I identify as centrist or center right. I'm a law enforcement veteran, a military veteran, and a science fiction, philosophy, and religion nerd. So if any of that interests you, you can just go into YouTube, type in Counterpoints Common Spelling. You can find my content there. That's pretty much it. So thank you for having me, Dylan. Thank you for hosting. I sincerely appreciate it.
Wonderful, no problem. I'm going to throw it over now to Lauren Southern.
Hi, my name is Lauren. I'm a documentary filmmaker. My reputation probably precedes me in a lot of these circles, but if you only watch the Serfs or maybe Dylan, you may have some opinions about me that aren't quite accurate, and I look forward to potentially presenting those in this debate. And thank you for having me, Dylan. I appreciate it.
Wonderful. Now we're going to throw it over to Tale of Two Rabbits.
Actually, I prefer to let Lance go first.
Okay, Lance can go first.
I want people to. I know some people will think this is poisoning the well, but I really want people to understand that with the Tale of Two Rabbits, this is going to be a regular occurrence. Oh, Tale of Two Rabbits, I would like you to speak. Oh no, I'll let Lance speak. Remember, this is just an intro into talking about yourself and what you do. And he's already passed the buck over to somebody else just for an intro. To just let that settle in your mind. He was asked to provide an intro for himself, about himself, and he passed it off to Lance. And I have to say, I think Lance's face says absolutely everything that you need to know about that situation right there. Moving on.
Sure. Hey, I'm Lance of the Serfs. I'm political dumpster fire, comedy garbage on the internet, and you can find me everywhere social media is sold.
Wonderful. Now we can throw it over to Tale of Two Rabbits.
Hello, my name is Tale of Two Rabbits here on Twitch. It is Twin Rabbit on YouTube. I tend to do mostly streaming of Let's Plays of games that are Indigenous, and so either games that have been created by Indigenous authors and developers, or they contain a lot of Indigenous-related themes. And on my Twitter, I shitpost. On my YouTube, the videos are a lot about Indigenous history, archaeology, and a little bit about video game history too.
So this is really, really important. So Tale of Two Rabbits has tried to portray himself or themselves as somebody who is completely indigenously focused. I play Indigenous video games. I play Indigenous material. I watch Indigenous material, media, so on and so forth. I am so much into Indigenous stuff that as well as playing games, I go into the idea of following archaeology on my YouTube. I talk about all of this sort of stuff and the history, the archaeology, everything on my channel. So if anybody here should be an expert and should have the most to say about this Canadian genocide, which is the topic, you would expect it to be this guy, right? You would expect it to be this guy. I wouldn't bet on it. Just giving a little bit of a spoiler there. I wouldn't bet on it.
Okay, wonderful. Now we're going to go into prepared statements. Now let me clarify for the audience what we're going to be talking about today, so there's no confusion. The topics that were given to me was that the debate will be primarily about retributive and vigilante justice for historical wrongs, and there might be some secondary discussions, if time permits it, about the recent burning of Catholic churches in Canada, the recent discovery of the unmarked Indigenous graves in the same nation, and the actions of the Canadian government in the past, if it could fall under the historical definition of genocide. Do we all agree on the discussed topics? That there's no confusion?
Yep.
Wonderful.
Sounds
Okay,
good.
we will start with counterpoints with a prepared 2-minute statement. You will be timed, and I will give you a warning once you have about 20 seconds left.
Yeah, so in preparation for this debate, I think the primary thing that I landed on was the fact that burning churches is just unacceptable. I understand that there's a contentious history in Canada, but there's no real excuse for throwing a Molotov cocktail inside of a building. You can have descriptive reasons, much like riots. You can understand why something is going on, but you probably can't morally justify it. So that's the number one contention that I would have. Number two, when it comes to Indigenous history, I think that the audience will probably be surprised, or hopefully they're not surprised, that there is a lot of concession for the sins of the past and all that kind of stuff, and we can get into that. I'm interested to talk about definitions because obviously the word genocide is being brought into this conversation, so I want to talk about that as an aspect of this. And then ultimately, I think this conversation is indicative of where we are at as a continent as a whole. Europeans conquered this continent, colonized this continent, and did some nefarious stuff in order to do that. We have done sins in the past. Now we have to reckon with those sins and move forward as a society. So I'm hoping that we can kind of, even if it's very uncomfortable, even if it's contentious, I'm hoping that maybe we can do that here a little bit. And I'll leave it there. We can go.
Wonderful. With 48 seconds to spare. Now we're going to throw it over to...
For an opening statement, he counterpoints has actually already gave quite a lot of concessions. He's already said that we can admit that there were some ills, there were some wrongs that need to be rectified. He's already gone to the points of saying that I can understand why things are happening, so on and so forth. He's actually gave quite a lot of concessions in his opening statement there. And he's already come to the point of trying to say that, look, I want to come to an agreement. I want to try and understand this. I want to try and find some solutions. The only problem is that he doesn't realize that he's on the internet and, we don't find solutions. We just moan about the problems. But that's just my cynicism speaking. So let's move on to the supposed Nazi queen that is Lauren Southern, shall we?
Lauren Southern.
Hey, okay, so I've written a little something, haven't written anything else for debate, but today we have framed this debate as a discussion, obviously, around retributive and vigilante justice and whether or not Canada is guilty of genocide. But what we are debating in reality here is acts of political terrorism, the committing of hate crimes, the burning down of religious sites, including the recent burning down of refugee churches, and those who are hell-bent on making excuses for this behavior, all based on the recent discovery of mass graves of Indigenous children, which activists have portrayed as evidence of genocidal actions by the Canadian government, which were covered up. The only problem with this entire debate is, firstly, even if this happened and the Canadian government committed genocide, there would be no excuse to commit hate crimes today, especially against people who had no connection to said actions. And an equally important and shocking revelation should be is that no mass graves were found in the first place. This is an entirely false narrative. No one here today is going to deny historical injustices happened. No one is going to deny there were deliberately children taken from their homes and educated to no longer have their culture and language, and that is horrific. I don't think that should happen to anybody. However, distorting the past, exaggerating atrocities, inventing the existence of mass graves to make it appear as though Canada committed and covered up some sort of Holocaust is a horrific mishandling of the truth, and it does nothing to help us uncover and heal from genuine wrongdoings which occurred. And in fact, it has caused more trauma today for Canadians and Indigenous communities who are now seeing their communities destroyed, their churches burnt to the ground, and relations ripped apart even further.
So, again, even though it sounded like Lauren Southern was, and she is, attacking the basis of argumentation, she's also still actually giving quite a lot of concessions in her own arguments, where she's saying, look, historical injustices obviously have happened. We're going to talk about them, but they obviously shouldn't have happened. But that doesn't give you free range to be able to have the expression of trying to burn down a church in retributive justice, so on and so forth. Trying to belay the point of that there isn't any mass graves, so to speak. They are either going to be some sort of form of already forgotten or mismanaged graveyard, or just a graveyard in general. Now, that doesn't mean that all the kids that they're put into the graveyard were put in there for obscene reasons, but it also doesn't mean that all of them were put in there because they died of natural causes either. So she's trying to give ground, but also as well at the same time as giving ground, she's also affirming her own points as well. It was actually a really good opening statement from the supposed Nancy Queen that hates every other race bar the white race, apparently. So let's see how the left side are going to deal with this, shall we?
Okay, 7 seconds to spare. We're now going to throw it over to Lance from the Serfs.
Hey, everybody. So I'm going to say right out of the gates that neither me or my partner support or condone the burning of any religious institutions. What we're here today to talk about is obviously restorative and retributive justice in relation to the residential school system in Canada and the involvement of the Catholic Church therein. I'm going to try and say this as quickly and concisely as I can. The original founding father of this country, Sir John A. Macdonald, was a white nationalist. And I don't mean that in the sense that lefties like to call every single person they don't like a Nazi. He was a person who believed in the superiority of the Aryan race. He said it frequently. He, in Parliament, would say things that were considered to be outlandish and racist by the sign of the times. And he started both the Indian Act in Canada and the reservation school system in Canada. He also instigated the reserve system in Canada. Now, for anyone who's unaware, the Indian reservation school system, what it essentially did was took 150,000 children away from their parents' arms and forcibly put them in institutions where they were systematically beaten, tortured, raped. They had their culture removed from them, their language, every aspect of them was destroyed. Those who tried to escape would often die in the cold or drown in the water. So it was a horrifying experience by all accounts. Now, the Catholic Church themselves have never formally apologized for this. Neither have they been held to account for the thousands upon thousands of priests and nuns who, again, tortured and raped children. So I believe if we're going to be talking about restorative justice, the first place to begin would be that they have to both be held accountable for the crimes that they've committed, as well as the fact that they have to, in some form or another, pay retribution to those in which they've harmed. Thanks.
So Lance has built up a couple of, or the Serfs has built up a couple of, I was going to say decent points. Points, I think would be the correct term, points. Where he's saying, well, the founder of Canada was founded on the idea of white supremacy. So, of course, this foundation of white supremacy would lead to the indigenous people being raped, tortured, and so on and so forth, because that was the foundation of our country, their country. And I don't see how that necessarily logically follows, because they should have got to a different point at different times, different ways of thinking. I don't think that it logically follows that for the whole period of time they will systemically be that way forever. I would also say that I don't think that follows necessarily that because one person, and that is the founder of the country, would want everything to go that way, and it was all done intentionally because of that one person. I'm just saying that the foundation that he's made his argument doesn't seem to really hold too much water on that aspect. But then he goes on to the point of saying, well, we need to recognize past discretions. Now, from both counterpoints, they have both already said that they are willing to grant that concession, that there were atrocities that happened, and we should look for justice for those situations and those people. So even though the Lance's position or opening statement sounds like a strong one, it doesn't really have too much of a basis because it doesn't really logically follow. And then as well, the people that he's arguing have already gave into that concession of saying that we need to find justice for the people that have had that happen to them. So generally, that doesn't really seem to be a strong opening statement. But that could just be me. Let me know if you think he did actually have a strong statement or not in the chat or in the comment section down below. I will have to say that this is probably the best that I want to call him 2.5 Wolves because it reminds me so much of 2.5 Men, but then I realized that his is actually his name. So, sorry, 2 half Wolves or half of 2 Wolves or whatever his name is. 2 Wolves is what I'm going to call him. This is probably the best that he does in the debate. And for people that watch me generally, if I have other people that are watching me at some later point or whatever, I generally try to be as non-biased as I can as a human. Now, obviously, I'm going to have some biases, but generally, I can't actually think of a better time that he actually does better But let's carry on. And
Okay, with 18 seconds to spare. Now I'm going to throw it over to Tale of Two Rabbits for the last intro of the debate.
I would first like to thank Lance for asking me to join him today, and Dylan's Luscious Locks for moderating. I open, as I so often do, with a story. In 1601, Juan de Onate visited a gigantic agricultural and industrial center of more than 20,000 people in what is now central Kansas. Because he was a conquistador, he then kidnapped and tortured 4 children to identify the houses of the town's leaders, and immediately afterward, he waged a war to destroy the city with an army of nearly 1,000 soldiers. It was a mass slaughter. For the next 500 years, the school-taught history of the United States was that tribes of the plains were barely organized, semi-nomadic hunter-gatherers who knew only territorial wars and primitivism. And then, in 2016, using records, archaeological fieldwork, and remote sensing technology, Etzanoa once again became a fact. The stories natives had been telling for generations were finally again acknowledged as fact. As has happened many times in recent years, the U.S. was forced to again confront the cruelty and lies that had been perpetrated against the indigenous peoples right up to this very day. In May of 2021, using records, archaeological fieldwork, and remote sensing technology, the stories of the residential schools recorded by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's report and told by natives for generations were finally again acknowledged as fact. Canada is presented with 2 possibilities when such simple and straightforward modifications to the histories that we were all taught as children are uncovered. We can, as in the case of Etzanoa, accept the correction, accept the native stories which roll along, and move forward with the knowledge that wrongs were committed that must be reckoned with. Or we can choose, as Lauren apparently has, what has brought us here today. Refuse the most basic and straightforward facts in favor of denial, deflection, and dismissal. I come here as witness to those facts, as one small voice in a chorus to those stories. I come here to discuss justice for those wrongs and the restoration of dignity for those who suffered what was erased.
Okay.
right. So first of all, we start talking about how injustices have happened to Indigenous people throughout the whole of the USA, and how when people were telling stories in the USA that without evidence, people didn't believe them, and the US tried to hide it as a point of government. Now, this isn't to say, oh, well, it doesn't matter because that's how governments act. It is to point out that that is how governments act. That's how all of history is done. The history is always told by, unfortunately, the victor. The way that we try to make history more non-biased is by trying to use collaborating resources. So we try and use resources and sources that come from both sides or from sides that weren't even involved in conflicts. That's the way that we try to collaborate what happened. So his point is that, well, governments are bad. They cover things up, especially when it's really bad stuff. Okay, we get that. That's fine. It's a good argument to begin with. Then he goes on to say, well, the indigenous stories that have been told are now being proven with evidence, and we should listen to those stories. Again, good argument. That's what we should be doing, right? But yet, Lauren and Counterpoint have both come out and said that, look, no, we actually agree that when we find out that there has been atrocities given, we should go out of our way to make sure that the justice is taken and prevailed. And then he actually goes into a point of attacking Lauren for saying that she's trying to deflect, dodge, and whatever. But yet the debate hasn't even started. And this is no protection of Lauren. I'll be honest with you, I don't particularly like her that much. But Lauren already gave concessions in her opening title. So how is she deflecting, dodging when she's already given concessions? I don't know. Let's see how this dog and pony show continues, shall we?
So I just want to re-establish the rules one last time. If it gets out of control, I will assert myself and shut down the conversation. If you believe it is unfair, I'm sorry to say that I don't care. I will do my best to restore. I'm a law and order moderator. Law and order. Other than that, I think everybody else knows no terms of service violations of any sort. We are now going to have an open format for about an hour and a half to an hour and 45 minutes at max. And then with 2-minute outros, anyone is free to start the conversation. It is now open for dialogue.
If you hear
well,
my cat
considering
going,
that I've just been accused of denying basic facts, I would really like a Tale of Twin Rabbit to describe which basic facts I've denied.
In your opening statement, you said that these deaths didn't occur and that these bodies weren't found.
That's not what I...
Right, I know Lauren's already said this, but Lauren didn't say that the bodies weren't found. Lauren actually said that the description of there being called mass graves is not a apt description, in her opinion. Whether you agree with her or not, that would still be her opinion. That's not her denying that bodies may not or may have been found. That's not her not saying that, oh, well, this didn't occur. That's her saying, I don't agree with the definition of mass graves. But let's see how this continues, because this is the whole point that I was trying to make earlier. Because it's Lauren Southern that's doing this debate, if I was to make that type of point, most people would understand that I'm talking about the definition of mass graves, where it seems at this point he's trying to say, well, because you said that mass graves weren't there, you are saying that there was no bodies. Seems interesting, right? Yeah, let's just carry on watching.
Said is it? I said there were no mass graves found.
I would be curious to know what your evidence is for that claim.
Firstly, I would like to ask both you and Lance to describe which mass graves have been found in Canada, and then I can respond to that.
That was actually a really good rhetorical question, because rather than Lauren trying to prove a negative or trying to grasp something out of hand or giving Lance and Tower 2 rabbits or 2 wolves or whatever the actual point to be able to grasp onto, Lauren's now come back and gone, well, you want me to say that this is a mass grave or determine whether it is or not. Tell me which one you consider a mass grave and we'll talk about it. I don't think you can get any better rhetorically than doing that. You claim that I am denying mass graves. Where is a mass grave? Tell me about it, and I will tell you if I still think it's a mass grave or not. Until that time, I can't tell you. I honestly think that that's personally a good retort.
Would you like to be more specific, as in the one that
Well,
was...
you're saying...
I have a headache. I haven't even banged my head against the floor yet. So he accuses Lauren Southern of saying that there's no such thing as mass graves. Lauren then says back to him, well, can you show me where mass graves were found? And he says, well, I don't know what you mean by that. Where do you want me to start? Ow. That's all I want to say to that is just ow.
I'm lying by saying no mass graves have been found, so tell me, where have the mass graves been found?
Well, the story that kicked it off was the Kamloops residential school mass graves that were identified using ground-penetrating radar.
So this is really interesting. For anybody that wants to actually follow along, again, in the description box, I have linked to a Google Docs that I've actually prepared, and I've linked to all different stories and all different relevant data points that have been brought up by this debate, including one of the papers that is mentioned by Lance later on. If you want to follow along, they are generally linked in chronological order, going from the beginning, from the top, going from the beginning of the debate down to the bottom to the end. So if you wanted to follow along, you can. But Kamloops, sorry, had 215, I believe, graves that were found. And in the news stories that I have selected to give to you, it actually physically states that they knew about these graves and they were just unmarked graves. So Lauren Southern here has done absolutely amazing in trying to catch Tale of Two Rabbits here in a gotcha moment. Because remember, Tale of Two Rabbits was actually trying to say to Lauren Southern, you deny mass graves. You deny that they found mass graves. The actual gravesite he cites is actually listed by the own chiefs of knowing that this is not a mass grave and is actually a graveyard. It's just a forgotten graveyard. So Lawrence Southern technically here is a massive win, but we shall see how this goes forward.
Right, and ground penetrating radar cannot detect bodies.
Are you saying that as an assertion?
Right, for anybody that doesn't know, ground penetrating radar is literally as it says. The thing is, it cannot detect organic matter. It can only detect solid matter, and it bounces off solids to give a radar prediction of what's going on. So it will show impressions, normally in the way of raised lines on an actual screen. There is no high screen resolution or high screen definition of, oh, there's a body here. It's like, no, there's like a 6x2, like 6 foot, like depression in the ground that kind of shows up, and so on and so forth. And it kind of looks like a grave. So that's what she means by it doesn't actually show bodies. You can infer it does by saying that there's a graveyard there and it looks like graves, but it doesn't actually physically show dead bodies. It physically can't do that. The technology isn't there for it to be done that way. So let's see how the Tower of Twin gets this. Yeah, let's just see.
Absolutely. You can go look this up. In fact, the woman who conducted the GPR herself actually went to my university. She said herself, we cannot confirm anything. This is simply an assumption based on, and I would encourage people watching to go and take a look at what images ground penetrating radar show. They just show anomalies in the ground. They don't give you any context. They don't tell you if bodies are there. The anomalies could appear to be graves. Do they know if this grave site is just an overgrown graveyard? Do they know if it was the community graveyard? Do they know if there are any bodies in what these ground anomalies look like? No. And this is the facts of the case. The woman who did the ground penetration test in Kamloops, which sparked this all off, stated, we cannot know if there are any bodies under here until someone has dug this up and they've exhumed the bodies.
If anybody actually wants any context for that, again, I have got Google Docs in the description. Go on to that. I have linked under the Google Doc video of Sarah Bellew. She is the person that Lauren Southern is actually talking about. We find that out later, but she's the person that's there. I actually have the video in which she's actually talking about that and actually confirms almost to a T what Lauren Southern has just actually said. So whether you want to call Nazi Southern, call Lauren a Nazi or whatever, she's not factually inaccurate here. She's actually correct. So whether you dislike her as a person, her information is correct to a T. There is no fault in that at the minute.
If they are there. And not only that, but the tribe leader there in Canada of the Kamloops band that brought out the initial statement about this said, even if there are bodies under the ground here, it's not a mass grave. And these are just preliminary findings, which has been the general consensus of all of these grave sites found, that they are not mass graves, and portraying it as such is deliberately misstating the truth and trying to make it seem as though Canada were committing some Holocaust where they were lining children up, shooting them, and throwing them in a grave that they dug, when we are talking about graveyards, if there are any bodies at all.
So Lauren's not actually wrong. So she is talking about the 715 mass grave is not a mass grave. And again, with the Google Docs, I can take you to a BBC News story that actually confirms literally everything that she's just said, but also as well the actual Kamloops findings, the 216, is also a story that is actually absolutely confirmed by what she says, and the chief there actually confirms exactly the same thing. Also as well, I have more information that's regarded on the 216 graves found as well. More of them are actually pointed out saying that they're not sure if this is a mass grave, so on and so forth. So she's not wrong by any stretch of the imagination. None of these main ones that are being pointed are actually mass graves by any definition of colloquially or by the actual definition of this whatsoever. So yeah, and Sarah also goes on to talk about it. It's linked in there as well, but we don't know if this is a mass grave. We don't know if we found graves. We don't know definitively anything at the minute. So I do advise you to read the Google Docs if you're interested. Don't take my word for it. Actually read it, and you'll be able to see that on this point alone, not necessarily through everything of the debate, but Lauren Southern is completely and actually factually correct on everything she stated thus far. So with that being said, let's see how Team Left are going to deal with this.
Okay, you just said that the woman who did the GPR examination went to college with you. The director of the company.
She didn't say that she went to college with her. She said that they went to the same college. After all, there is many different faculties and many different areas, programs, just everything in a university. Just because that you went to a university at the same time does not mean that you knew them and your pally and friends. And the fact that the person who had supposedly have done all of this research, that is so interested in the history, so interested in the archaeology, that does this as a profession on his YouTube channel, as well as doing all of the indigenous video games and so on and so forth, he is so into his indigenous aspects and history that he doesn't know the person who actually carried out the GPR, the ground penetrating radar survey for both sites, but more importantly, the Kamloops site. But yet, he's the expert, guys. He's the expert. He knows everything.
That actually did it is a man named Julio. So who did?
No, not unless you're talking about the one that did the 715 or the 716 one. But she's talking about the Kamloops one, which is definitely done by Sarah Boulier. There are news articles abound about it. There are videos by MSNBC and MSN that actually have her talking about the findings. All you need to do is just Google her name. You'll end up finding it is on the first pages of her name. In actual fact, Google in Kamloops grave found, and it's one of the top stories that actually comes up with a GPR. So, yeah. Carrying on, because I am actually getting a headache at the minute.
Did you go to school with?
No, she's an instructor at the university I went to, and I mean, I can read
So
her
this is
name here.
actually
Let
someone
me.
who was
So
related to the
this
company.
is the girl who did the GPR technology test, which once again, GPR cannot pick up organic matter. Her name was Sarah Boulier. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. I'm terrible with French names. So she conducted the search herself, and she stated nothing she has found can be confirmed unless excavations are done at the scene. These excavations have not happened.
I didn't
So
hear
you-
Tell Two
you-
Rabbits.
So this is from the Globe and Mail.
Give me a
Hold
moment.
on.
Give me a moment.
You-
I was
you were
trying to hear.
trying
Give me. Okay, let me just start. When I'm talking, nobody else is supposed to start. I didn't hear what Tell Two Rabbits was saying earlier. Could you repeat what you were trying to say?
Well, at this point, I'm a little bit lost. She's friends with someone whose name she doesn't know how to pronounce, who isn't the director of the company who was hired to do the scanning. So at this point, I don't understand exactly what it is we're discussing. I thought we were here to discuss burning of churches and restorative justice. If you'd like to challenge GPR and whether or not it's efficacious in the use of archaeological remains, I would point you to Etzanoa. Are you also challenging?
This is absolutely mind-boggling. Because whether you want to take Lauren Southern as being the Nazi queen, he did not pick up on anything that she said. There is no honesty in what he just reiterated and repeated or parroted, supposedly, what Lauren has just said. There is no way in hell that Lauren went, yeah, I went to a school with this girl and she did this and she did that. No, she's saying that the person who did the investigation went to my college and she's the one who has said these things. She is not challenging ground penetrating radar, GPR. She's not challenging it. She's saying that it cannot show bodies. It can show what looks like graves and how graves might look, but it does not show what is inside the graves. It shows the impression of the dirt that's been moved in a certain figuration. It does not show what's underneath it. It does not show what's in it. It doesn't have a little spy camera that goes, yep, that's been decomposed for about 500 years. No, it doesn't do any of that. It just shows an impression on the ground saying, well, that dirt's been moved. It looks like it's a grave site. That's it. That's all it does. So the dishonesty here, and again, I do not like Lauren Southern. I think that she's a dick. But even though the people call her a Nazi queen, you should at least take what she says as gospel. As in, when she says, I think this, believe what she says, that's what she believes, right? Try and actually attack what she says, not what you think that she meant by what she said. Because at the minute, all you're doing is attacking a straw man, a good man.
Challenging the identification of literally every site in the Americas that has.
Can I jump ahead?
Wait, I would let Tell Two Rabbits finish what they were trying to say. Can you finish that?
Because this is outside the scope of this conversation. I keep hearing affirmations of, oh, well, I know a person. I don't care that you know a person.
So she never said once that she knows them. So this is where the dishonesty still tries to come in. That he, at least at the minute, is trying to build a story that Lauren's going, well, I know this person that says this thing, but it goes against what's actually being said in stories. Where in actual fact, again, I have to reiterate this because this is the whole point of the debate. Because of Lauren's past and how people perceive Lauren to be, when she says something, and rightly so, you should go and check it for fact-based evidence, the same as you should do for me, the same as you should do for anybody that you follow on the internet and even the news and everything else like that. If you want to follow it, follow it. But he's not even doing a cursory search. If he just typed in Kaloup's gravesite, GPR, her name comes up. Again, part of the MSNBC news part of the MSN news part. I think I've got the MSN news feed in the actual Google Docs. So she's not coming out of her way to say, oh, I know this person, and she says, because she's my friend, I trust her. She's saying, well, this person just went to my college. It's not like when you go, oh, Linford Christie went to my school, or, oh, when I was in Portugal, I went to school with Cristiano Ronaldo. Those are the things that you say. That doesn't mean you fucking know them.
I am talking about the company that did the work.
I'm talking about the woman who every Canadian article has stated did the search in Kamloops. And anyone can look this up. Go look up who did the GPR test in Kamloops. I'm reading the Globe and Mail right now. The title, Anthropologist Explains How She Concluded 200 Children Were Buried at Kamloops Residential School.
Okay, stop right there. Stop right there. How she concluded the 215 bodies were buried.
And with it, once again, that's just media bullshit, because the article literally says she also stressed her findings cannot be confirmed unless excavations are done at the scene.
Let's do a little bit of a concession here, right? Let's say that there are definitively bodies there. The whole stuff to do with the 215 bodies that were found at Kamloops indicates by the tribe's chief that it is a grave that they knew was there. It was just an old graveyard, a misused graveyard, or misremembered graveyard. It is not, by any definition, a mass burial site or a mass grave site. It is basically a cemetery. So even if we give the consensus or concession, that there were bodies found, it doesn't get you to mass grave.
Can I jump ahead between the two of y'all?
Okay, 1 second. Lance was trying to say something before you, and so I wanted to make sure he got a chance to speak.
No, I wanted Tail to finish what he's saying, and then I'll go after counterpoints.
Okay, then we'll go Tail finish what he's saying, then we'll move over to counterpoints.
Okay.
If she would like to challenge the findings of basic archaeology, then she's welcome to do so, but that's not why we're here, as I was led to believe.
So again, the idiot that is Two Rabbits still is trying to harp on this straw man that she's trying to go against GPR. She's not. She's saying that you cannot determine if there are bodies in a mound of dirt that's been disturbed, because that's how it looks on the screen. It doesn't show you any bodies or anything else like that. It just doesn't. So she's not challenging that. She's just saying that it's by definition not confirmed yet. But even if you give the concession, it's still not a mass graveyard. So let's carry on with the straw man.
Made this accusation against me. I responded, and I'm citing the individual who made these findings.
Oh God, can I bridge these two fucking perspectives, please? Because otherwise we're gonna spend the whole time on fucking minutia.
Okay.
As Dylan Burns is just
all right.
put on,
So
please,
let's go ahead and bridge these two
subscribe.
perspectives for the love of God.
I don't have
the primary contention is not, GPR or whether or not kids died or anything like that. The whole reason is the use of definitions and words. Ultimately, I would like to avoid semantics, and instead of fighting over semantics, I would like to talk about the concepts that we're trying to convey. The main objection that I think Lauren is poking to, that I would poke to as well, is basically the use of mass graves. When we use words like mass graves, basically what I conceptualize is people handed shovels, marched out into the woods, executed, and then thrown in shallow graves, and then dirt loosely thrown over them. Okay, that's the primary contention here, is whether or not that's what's occurred. And based off of historical fact, which I'm sure Tale of Two Rabbits and the Serfs can assert one way or the other, whether or not they agree with this, that's not what happened. They didn't march out 200 kids into the woods, execute them one at a time, throw them in a ditch, and throw dirt over them. And I have more points to this, but I just want to let's just bridge this gap on the definition of mass graves and keep it moving.
Caleb, anything yet? Would you like to speak at all?
Yeah, totally. So, Lauren, you're already starting out with conspiracy theories. Whether or not you agree with the way the technology is being used, that's really not up for debate right now. Because at the end of the day, the people who have been accused right now of accomplishing these crimes, they, in no short form.
So, before Lance gets away with that straw man, because his debate partner is trying to say that Lauren is going against the consensus of archaeology, which she's not, he's jumped on the bandwagon because of, I don't know, maybe he doesn't want to actually deal with the arguments that she's actually put forth. And I think that they think that they can get away with it because she's been dubbed the Nazi Queen. Now, again, I'm not trying to diminish anything that she's done by that. I just think that if you're going to go into a debate and platform Lauren, and again, that's your own debate, whether you would or you wouldn't, at least when you debate her, you should take her as face value. So if she says something, you should tackle what she says, not create a straw man of what she hasn't said. Anyway, that's it. Doesn't get any better. It really doesn't.
Have already like you've received a condolence from the Pope as an acknowledgement that something has happened here. There has been multiple instances, such as the Mohawk tribe, that have actually had to exhume bodies after ground penetration had been used. This is not something in which the ground penetrating radars have discovered these bodies and then suddenly we don't have any idea about whether or not this is occurring. Also, the testimonies that have been given in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which are numerous, we're talking thousands and thousands of people, have attested to the treatment of the children in these residential schools. Once again, that is not a matter up for, did they line them up against the walls and shoot every single one of them in the face? That is not exactly what happened here. Once they became wards of the state, as in once they became the property of the federal government or the provincial government, their treatment then became their responsibility. So whether they died from experimental starvation, which is something that happened, whether they died from high rates of tuberculosis, which is something that happened, whether they died from torture, rape, or abuse, which is something that happened, 1 in 5 children was sexually abused in these schools. That was sexual abuse that was happening while, again, they were children as wards of the state. So it doesn't matter how you want to try and skirt past whether or not these crimes that occurred.
Right, very, very quickly. Apart from the first time that I cut it, the second time when he was starting to give stats about what's actually happened to the poor children at these Indigenous schools, he's not actually wrong in most of the stats that he's actually put forth. So, Lauren, as far as I'm aware, and counterpoints will obviously say what he needs to say afterwards, as in it will continue the video and I'm sure we'll get to the points. But neither of them have actually said that these things didn't happen. The debate for the last 20 minutes has been roughly about whether or not GPR can find bodies, which it can't. It can only find depressions in the ground. But then you can make a logical inference that there are bodies there, or at least should be. And then a straw man of Lauren's position saying that she's deflecting, dodging, and she knows a person that is this person that's helping her. I don't even know where the logic comes from. But Lance's position is actually an interesting position. So his argument is, well, even if it wasn't intentional, because all of the children that were in these schools were wards of the state, by definition, all of responsibility goes on to the Canadian government. So if anything was done in those schools, even if it wasn't sanctioned by the Canadian government, it's still the responsibility of the Canadian government, and they should take responsibility for it because they are upholding to responsibility of the children. So it's an interesting argument. I don't really think it holds water, but it's an interesting argument, and I'm trying to be as fair as possible.
Okay, I'd like to address that.
Sure.
So
Do you want to give? It was towards Lauren, but are you okay with counter responding?
Yeah, he can respond. Actually, Connor, can I just quickly make one clarification and then I'll jump to you? I never stated atrocities didn't happen at these schools. It was a very unfortunate thing in the 1800s and 1900s, early 1900s, particularly in general, that there were horrific things going on at orphanages, boarding schools, residential schools, of course, and there's proof of this. But you have asserted, and I don't want to see you walk back on this unless you're going to admit it, that these were mass graves. You have asserted that they are evidence of genocide when the very chiefs of these tribes, who you're saying are talking about the lived experience in the area, have stated these are not mass graves. Some of these, if the bodies are found, we don't know whose graves they even are. They could be a mix of settler children as well who died of tuberculosis. And there was a pandemic going on at this time that the residential schools were at their peak. These could be various reasons, but they were not mass graves. And that is what I'm calling you out on. That's what I'm calling out all these activists on that have made this claim. And dying of tuberculosis, dying of disease, well, of course, we can talk about horrific, the horrific conditions. To say that people were intentionally trying to give children tuberculosis, I think is absurd. But I'll let Connor keep going.
Yeah, so I just want to jump ahead descriptively, because at the end of the day, like...
No. Lauren had the massive point of the debate at that point where both of these gentlemen on the left were saying that all of these were mass graves. And Lauren basically at that point had them either to admit that they were mass graves or that they were just graveyards. Now, again, that doesn't mean that the bodies that are in the graveyards weren't forcibly put in there one by one. It just means by definition it's not a mass grave. And unfortunately, counterpoints, Connor, you kind of shat on her parade. You kind of rained all over it. She literally had a lineup for it either is or it isn't. They wouldn't have been able to walk it back otherwise or bring it up later. So, grr.
This is what I guess frustrates me about this conversation. So we can describe wrongs and evils on a spectrum, and we can just acknowledge that they're evil and that they're wrong. So for instance, Lauren and I are both parents. If our children were taken from us, forcibly taught another language, wards of the state, and then by the way, like the demographics or the stats that I saw was literally like 70% tuberculosis, like 20% fire, and 10% death from exposure during attempted escape. So if my son was kidnapped from my home, forced to learn another language, given a different name, and then tried to escape back to me and died in the woods, I can't think of a more horrific thing to experience, except for my family being dragged out all at once and being executed. So on a spectrum, it's pretty much like the second worst thing that I can imagine. And I think that we can concede that while also basically trying to get into the historical detail. And by the way, like this isn't so much so whenever I'm trying to describe past historical wrongs or anything like that, I'm not trying to excuse it, okay? I'm trying to be descriptive about the historical past. And then what I would say, I'll just jump out on this limb, is that by definition, by the UN's own definition, kidnapping children and then basically trying to destroy in whole or in part a certain demographic group or whatever is the definition of genocide. The question is, when did this end? Whether or not this is comparable to other historical atrocities, which if on a spectrum, you can probably say, and then whether or not that justifies current vandalism and current attacks on Christian churches. That's kind of like the crux of it for me.
Okay, one moment. I was given a link by Lance that I put in the chat about tuberculosis, and I will also put it in the group chat as well for everybody else. Lauren responded to Lance, so I'm going to give Lance some time to respond.
Yeah, so first off, there's studies that have come out now that say researchers say that tuberculosis at the residential schools was no accident. So again, that was one of the many things that were done to these children, including the fact that these children were experimented on by giving them various different degrees of sustenance, in that they were given malnutrition intentionally to see how children would react to different amounts of, say, milk and vitamins being given to them. The other thing to talk about when it comes to children in the residential schools and their atrocious numbers is, again, the mortality rate was about 40 to 60% in these Indian residential schools. If they are, like we've all established, I think we all agree right now that they were wards of the state, it doesn't matter what the cause of death was, even though the cause of death in many cases could be things like, again, physical or sexual torture, including traditional torture. There was an electrical chair in one of these schools. That being done, it doesn't matter if they died from starvation, it doesn't matter what. If you are taking children from their parents, you become responsible as their guardian for what happens to them. So all the deaths are...
Right. What Lance is talking about is if you go to the description and my description box and you go to the Google Docs, there is a link to a Bryce study or the Bryce report. And it is from, I believe, 1900 to 1907. So when he says, 40 to 60% of the entire population in the indigenous schools died, that was due to tuberculosis during that time and fires. And again, as counterpoints put out as well, trying to escape. Now, that doesn't mean what Lance said as well afterwards isn't true. That doesn't mean that they weren't sexually abusing the children. That doesn't mean that they weren't torturing them. That doesn't mean that they weren't doing atrocious things to these children, because they evidently were. It's a case of 40 to 60% that he threw out as a stat isn't indicative of all of what he said. And it's only a snapshot in history during tuberculosis, where a massive high proportion in the study states that it is between 20 to 40% of that population died of tuberculosis. Again, you could argue whether it was done intentionally by giving it to them, or if it was done intentionally by the state of how the schools were run. As in, they weren't given the same amount of funding and so on and so forth. But Lance is being dishonest with the stats here rather than actually explaining what they are. And he's only using a snapshot in time. So again, go into the Google Docs under the Bryce report. I've linked to 3 different, I've linked to the actual study. I've linked to 2 articles that talk about the study that do a breakdown of the study as well. So if you want to, you can follow along and it will show why Lance is not actually being completely honest with the facts. But let's carry on.
Are responsible.
Okay, can I?
Residential school system. And finally, my last point is going to be this: we cannot talk about this as if it's something that happened a long time ago and just a sordid part of our past. The last residential school in Canada closed in 1996. Okay.
Right. So, if say something that happened a lot in the 70s and 80s. Well, actually, no, sorry. Between the 50s and the 80s was what we would call board stall or board stare, where mostly boys would be kited off because they couldn't go to prison. So they were all thrown into this sort of a broad stare, which is basically what you would call a youth offenders centre now. And the boys in those areas were massively mistreated. Does that mean that all of them were? Does that mean that the ones in the 50s and the 60s were as bad as the ones in the 80s? No. Does that mean that something that happened in the 1900s was the same as what happened in the 1980s? Just because that you say that in 1907 that 60% of the population died, which was mostly due to a pandemic of tuberculosis, that doesn't mean that the atrocities that you've cited from 1907 happens in 96. Almost 90 years later. That's not how that works, Lance. But well done for at least adding a coherent point, even if it wasn't factually correct.
Okay, if you want some context, last time fucking Nirvana was still playing, you know, like that's not generations ago.
Okay, I need to interject with one stat. There's one stat that I
pulling on my heartstrings.
Okay, so Lance, you're saying that the mortality rate was 40 to 60%. You're talking about like individual schools, right? Not like the entirety of the program, right?
So according to the Dr. Bryce report, which was the medical inspector for the Department of Indian Affairs, he said the over sum total
in 1900s to 1907. Just so you know,
death was around 40 to 60 mortality.
Around the pandemic time of tuberculosis. See how he's picked a report that was done from 1907 that he's tried to put forward as a whole majority of 40 to 60% of people that went to the schools died. But yet he's actually talking about a snapshot within the pandemic of tuberculosis up to 1907. Now, again, very, very fucking bad. And absolutely irresponsible of the government not to give correct funding or to find out what's going on. But at the same time, is that intentionally the government's fault? Is that intentionally the people's fault that were there? You could argue there is, you could argue there isn't, but that doesn't make it an intentional genocide. And it also isn't indicative of what happened in 1907 up to 96. So let's carry on.
Okay, then I want to address this head on, because basically the current historical estimate total for deaths is around 4,000. As we've already talked about previously in the debate, total participants are around 150,000. That puts the death rate at roughly 2.5%. So if you're talking about the roughly 40 to 60%, what I read was that there were some schools where there were fires. So as a result, like 70% or 60% of the student body died in that fire. I also read that there were tuberculosis outbreaks. So within that subset of a specific school, like let's say there were 30 kids, 60% of them died in a horrific way. And again, like whenever I'm being descriptive, I'm not trying to minimize this, okay? I'm not trying to minimize this, but I'm just trying to clarify that weren't taken into a boarding school and then 40 to 60. It's just not factually accurate.
I also have one thing I want to respond to Lance here because this is really important.
So would
And
it be possible to allow Lance to respond to that first and then?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
So from
All right.
yeah, so from the same study counterpoints, it turns out that 90% of them suffered severe physical, emotional, or sexual abuse at the hands of the people who were guarding them. As a result,
again, in 1907. Now that doesn't mean that the report itself is wrong, because it's not. It's actually a report and it's actually given with factual evidence. But the report happened in 1907. So when he links to the Bryce report, again, it's in the Google Docs, it's in the description box. You can read it for yourself. It is from 1907. I also have a timeline in which the government, the Canadian government itself, then started to take notice from 1910. And then from using it in 1950, 56, 58, started to implement different actions from that report. So nobody's saying that things didn't get better. Nobody's saying that the report's wrong. It's just in the wrong time frame. It's from 1907, my dude. Not from 1996. And you're trying to put the stats that happened from there into the whole history, the whole timeline of the reservation schools. And I'm sorry, it just doesn't fit. You can't use a report from 1907 to talk about what happened in 96.
to that, many of them also committed suicide. So it isn't simply a matter of them dying in fires, a matter of them dying by tuberculosis, a matter of them dying by starvation, which of course were all accountable reasons. If 90...
Nobody said that those are the only reasons. Counterpoints said that those are the majority of reasons that they died in fires, that they died in tuberculosis. Not that they were the only reasons. This is why I dislike the Serfs, and this is why I generally dislike people like Tale of Two Rabbits as well, or Two Wolves, or whatever the fuck his name is. Because all they've done in this whole debate so far is create a straw man of a position, take a study out of context from a specific snapshot in time, and then try to correlate it to the whole time period of the indigenous school sect. Instead of doing that, why not actually bring up the atrocities that have happened? Show the timelines of what's happened. How that the Native Canadians, sorry, I get confused sometimes. It's not meant to offend anybody, but how Native Canadians or Indigenous people from Canada actually showed the timeline of how they had to fight for their rights. They couldn't actually even vote up to 1968. I have linked in the description box again in the Google Docs an actual timeline of what they had to fight for. If you were trying to win this type of argument, you could quite easily use that. But again, let's stick to the debate. Otherwise, I'm going to be here forever.
80% of the children are suffering one of those conditions. I think you'd all agree that on some, like the sum total of this was an atrocity being committed.
Sure, and just because I was directed at me.
Yep.
Yeah, but Lauren
So
was
fast.
next.
If you've got a quick point, yeah, go on.
Yeah, so fast. Again, whenever I'm being descriptive, I'm not trying to minimize what the fuck happened. It was fucking awful. I'm just trying to be descriptive so we are accurate. Because if I heard that 150,000 of my countrymen were, or ethnicity or whatever, were put through a system and 60% of them died, then maybe I would be Molotov cocktailing some shit, right? That's why we need to be very specific about what happened historically, and that's part of the reason why I wanted to have this discussion.
Okay. Also, Lance, people asking for the source and what you've provided. Could you send that over to me?
Yeah, of course.
Over to Lauren.
Cool. Yeah. So this is something that really rubs me the wrong way. Whenever people talk about residential school programs and compare the residential schools that were opened in the 1800s to the ones that existed in the 90s and were closed down then. If we talk about, for example, Lance talked about an electric chair existing and then said the last residential school that existed was shut down in 97. That school was called Cavalic Hall, and
96.
it was closed in 96. It was closed in the Northwest Territories. It was not set up as a residential school. In fact, it was a whole legal battle with the Canadian government to even get it registered as a residential school, because what it actually was it was a hostel/boarding room that was set up for kids who did not have families that were near high schools because they were too rural. So the Northwest Territories government said, okay, we need to create kids are way far out in the middle of nowhere. We can give them the option to go to high school so they have somewhere to stay.
What Lauren is actually saying is completely and utterly true. From, I believe, 1978, or I believe, depending on the different territories, 1978 up to 1984, I believe that they had a rotation in trying to get people into general populist schools, and it worked from the higher years going down. So like, say for the English people, your year 11 going down year 10, so on and so forth. That's kind of how it worked, how they try to get people into the right classes. But in general, they did that via rotating people from the actual indigenous schools into the actual state schools, for instance, and that's between 1978 and 1984. But check me, because it is in the description box down below in the Google Docs, so there is a timeline there for everybody. But what Lauren Southern is actually saying there is completely not true. Again, though, Lauren's kind of missed a point, and I think that she should have really have dug home on that by saying, well, you were trying to play a rhetorical game by saying that, oh, there was an electric chair in one of these schools, and the last school was to close in 96, trying to correlate the idea or do a connotation in your mind of saying, well, there must have been electric chairs up to 96, and the schools were the exact same as they were in the 1800s to 96, because they must have still been torturing people. Because why would you mention an electric chair and then talk about 1996 afterwards? These two things are not like the other.
An indigenous kid came out, stayed in this boarding area, and then later took the government to court to get reparations for residential schools, claiming that it was a residential school because he was removed from his family home by the government for the purpose of education, and that he started speaking his language. He started forgetting some of his language while he was going to an English-speaking school, and thus that was part of the destruction of his history. And to compare this to schools where there was abuse going on, where there was tuberculosis outbreaks, and where people were being forcibly removed from their homes, and comparing that to schools where it's like, hey, you know, kids that are in rural areas can't have a high school education. Let's create a hospital for them.
1 moment.
Like,
Wait.
that's absurd. You can read the case.
Can you
I
give me a moment?
encourage everyone watching this to read the case.
Lance, you can respond to that, of course.
Yeah, I guess my first response would be that
the reason for that is because the stream itself actually sort of half died. Not mine, but theirs, obviously. So that's the reason for that.
if your assertion is that nothing bad happened at that school and then therefore it doesn't matter, my statement as to which the last residential school closed in 1996, I think you're just resorting to pedantry. That doesn't change the fact that it was still considered a residential school. And
it's not pedantry when you say that, oh, these bad things happened where 40 to 60% of the people died in residential schools and the last one closed in 96. You are still rhetorically trying to suggest that the things that happened in the past were still happening to the things and people in the future or now. Grr.
would also like you to provide evidence that nothing bad ever happened in that institution, regardless.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Lauren didn't say that nothing bad happened in those institutions. I'm sure that there was bad things that happened in almost every school that has ever happened. That doesn't make it right. That doesn't mean that it's excusable. That doesn't, give it a free pass. But you're trying to suggest that bad things that happened in a school attains to genocide. That's what you're arguing at the minute, Lance. And but trying to say, oh, well, now prove nothing happened when you're trying to prove a genocide kind of is disingenuous, my man. It's kind of disingenuous, isn't it, my man? Anyway, carry on. Lauren's face there is just a picture.
So that fact, it doesn't change the overarching problem that these residential schools are not a sordid part of our past. We're going to eventually have to evolve into the child and foster care system because that was an evolution of the residential schools. And also talk about the fact that within the criminal justice system of Canada, almost 40% of all the Indigenous inmates are survivors of the residential school system. So the trauma that occurred in the residential schools did not simply end once the schools themselves closed.
Nobody would ever suggest that there was trauma that happened at these schools. Nobody is saying that the trauma wouldn't actually continue on and repeat as a cycle. But that doesn't attest to an actual genocide that has been intentionally developed and produced by the Canadian government. Yeah, shit's bad, but that doesn't atone to goddamn genocide with the government's knowing of it. Carrying on.
They would then continue as the individuals would work into society. And I guess that's where I would leave that one. If I know Taylor hasn't talked very much if he wants to inject something here.
Okay, I mean,
Got a response to that.
Yeah.
anybody's free to grab it.
Okay, because
Yeah, go ahead.
stating "prove to me that nothing bad ever happened in that school" is one of the dumbest statements I have ever heard. Something bad happens in every school, whether it is the fanciest, nicest, wealthiest, whitest school on the planet. Bad things happen at every school. The argument there is that schools in the 1800s deliberately removing kids from their parents, taking them in, they're being abused, mass disease, horrible conditions, is different from a school that is set up, or a housing area that is set up voluntarily for kids to go and stay there so that they can be somewhere with a high school in the area. Like you have to acknowledge that there is a difference between a lot of the schools in the 70s, 80s, and 90s that when people talk about the residential school system still existing, were voluntary. They weren't being removed from their homes. They're called residential schools because they were still technically under colonial education. So they were not being taught their languages. They were not being taught their culture. And we can talk about how that could be a problem. But to compare that to the residential schools where children were being ripped away from their families is just not even on the same level. And I find that extremely disingenuous.
See, when I first watched this debate, I kind of had a little bit of prejudice towards, obviously, Lauren. I've heard a lot from the left that's saying how bad she is and things like that, and you know how racist or how fascist she is. But in this debate, I'm not trying to say, "Oh, I've changed my mind and she's such a liberal and oh, I love her now." But she's giving a lot of ground and she's giving a lot of concessions. She's saying that yeah, things happened. We can talk about that. She's also saying that, oh, but this wasn't a genocide. We can't call it that. So she's given the concession to say, oh, look, there's things that's wrong with the system. We should fix the system, by also asserting at the same point, you're an idiot because this isn't the same equivalent. So I don't know where to go with that, because it's kind of just interesting to me in general, to be fair.
Sure. So if that's the dumbest thing you've ever heard in your life, you've lived a more privileged life than I thought possible. And I'm just going to say,
right. I'm sorry. Anybody that knows anything about argumentation or debate, if you make a claim, you're supposed to support it. When somebody says, oh, can you support the claim that you've made? You can't then say, like a child, well, prove it didn't happen, and then claim that that's the dumbest thing that you've ever heard because you've lived a privileged life. I think that Lance is just coming up with little narrative or little, I don't know what to call it, little verbiages that just, resonate with his own audience. Go, yeah, that's what it is. It's her white privilege or her female privilege or whatever type of privilege. It's just like, no, it's really a stupid question when you make an assertion and somebody asks you to prove your assertion going, well, prove it didn't happen. That's not how arguments work. Like, that's how no argument works. Even flat earthers understand that's not how arguments work, Lance. You're worse than a flat earther, Lance. Take that in, buddy.
Say this, the burden of proof would then be upon you. If you're going to assert that this school doesn't really constitute a residential school because at the end of the day, nothing bad happened here related to the same systems in place from the other residential schools in Canada, then...
That's not what she claimed. She claimed it wasn't a residential school because it wasn't registered as one. Not that nothing happened that was bad within the school. Why are you so bad at this?
Again, please demonstrate that with some kind of factual evidence.
I mean, okay, so the Canadian government argued that it wasn't a residential school, but, and I'm telling you, sure, it is registered as a residential school, but the reason is this individual who wanted to get compensation was able to make the argument, I was removed from my family to go to an education system which did not uphold my language. And the removal from the family was voluntary. His claim that it was his only option, and he claims that he was told he should go there, even though he only has a signed affidavit and no proof of that. People can go read the case themselves. So it's like, I'm just saying, if you want to say that's what residential schools were and say that's the same as all the past ones, then I'm actually not feeling that bad for the past ones. But of course they're not the same. Of course.
Yeah, and what I'm saying is that you're being caught in the pedantry of trying to assert that this one...
Again, it's not pedantry, Lance. It's not pedantry. It's a case of you are saying that people were being tortured, raped, murdered, dying of tuberculosis. 60% of the people that went into the schools died, and those schools all went up to 96. That's not her pointing out pageantry. That's her saying that you're trying to moralize all of these aspects and say that all of these things are the same up to 96. When even Lauren says that, look, the schools back yonder were worse, and you can't even understand that. You make flat earthers look smart, Lance. I mean that sincerely.
Residential school doesn't count.
Northern.
When
No, my
at the end of the
point
day,
is the
my
schools
statement,
that-
and it
you're
remains the
saying that
same, was that the
closed
last
in the
residential school
90s.
closed in 1996. That is just a factual
Yes, but
statement.
they were not okay. Well, can we?
Okay,
That's just a factual statement that the last one closed in 96. After I mentioned moral language such as an electric chair, raping, burning, tuberculosis, 40 to 60% of people died within the school system, that school system. And it only closed 20, 30 years ago. Like, but it's just a factual statement. It doesn't lead it to anywhere. You know, you're just asserting that that's what I mean. I don't mean to keep on using flat earthers, but they're more honest than you, Lance. Because at least they actually know when they're telling lies, because they believe it. I don't even think you understand where you're going at the minute. The citation that you've used is 1907. Doesn't counter anything up to the 96. Lauren's already given you a concession, and yet you're still trying to drive home that, oh, all I did was mention that the school closed in 96. I didn't put any moral language with it. Honest.
and now you would like to establish on top of that.
1800s?
Yes,
You
and
agree
if you
they're
want
not
to,
the same?
and can you establish then that nothing bad happened in that school? And if you can,
She never said that nothing bad in that school happened, Lance. She said it wasn't registered as a proper school. I wish I was still drinking.
fine. But at the end of the day, again, this is pedantry. It's just like
Okay,
this is
it's not
this is
pedantry.
probably one of the weakest gotchas I've seen so
Clarify,
far.
then we'll go back.
It's not.
Okay. Lauren,
Yeah.
you clarify.
So for another example of this and why it matters is some of the places called residential schools that retained the name residential schools well into the 80s and 90s were even run by native bands themselves. They were handed over. So if you're going to talk about how these residential schools were committing atrocities well into the 80s and 90s, then we're going to have to start punishing and asking for apologies from native bands themselves, like the Cowasses band, who held onto their residential school and ran it for 16 years.
Oh, we didn't want
But
to
yes,
jump
it
on
does
that.
matter what happened and what these schools turned into later on.
Oh, we didn't want to jump onto that. Still doesn't want to jump onto it.
Either of you are free to respond.
No, sorry, I didn't know if Tail's still here.
At this point, I'm just baffled. So,
Okay,
so far,
I'll let you speak.
we've denied the Indian Act. We've denied the removal policy. We've
Nobody denied any of that. Nobody's denied any of that. So the only person that's actually more dishonest than Lance is Hal of Twin Rabbit. Let's see how this carries on.
We've denied that because one guy said a bad thing incorrectly once, therefore all atrocities never happened. We've denied
No one is saying no.
I can understand why Lauren's getting so annoyed, because nobody said that. Counterpoints hasn't said that. The Nazi Queen Lauren Southern hasn't said that. Whether you dislike her or not, she's trying to be as factual as possible. And I'll be honest, with all the searching that I've done, which admittedly may not be enough, she seems to be correct on most of the stuff that she said so far. But yet, these two can't even pick up the arguments that are being mentioned. So let's carry on.
No
Yeah,
atrocities happened.
that's what we said.
Stop it.
Wait.
That's what we said.
Let's let him finish.
We've denied mass graves exist, even though the definition of mass is big.
I've calmed. I'm not going to scream. I'm not going to shout. You've denied mass graves exist because mass means big. Now, mass doesn't mean big. It's a scientific term. But when you use it in conjunction with mass grave, it means a large amount. I'm sorry, Lance. I take everything back. Come back. Come back, Lance. At least your arguments kind of made sense. Like, you could at least understand that he was just misunderstanding his own points, like his own statistics. But this guy, I'm getting a nosebleed.
So at this point, I'm just lost. What definitions are we even working with? I'd really like some clarification on some of this.
People with ADHD save
I'm
10
really sorry.
hours studying with this Chrome extension. But no, by all
Bye,
means.
Ad.
I mean,
So is a graveyard a mass grave?
if we're going to throw out,
Unfortunately, she's completely and utterly correct. If you're going by the definition that he's put forward, mass means a large amount or many, then a mass grave is a graveyard. And as Destiny said on his stream when he reviewed it at this point, I can't think of any other way to explain it. You're literally defining cemetery as a mass graveyard. I went down to visit my sister in the mass grave. That's the connotations of how you're defining this. Ay. And I don't even have any Latin in me.
out the Indian Act as even a discussable topic, then feel free. I have no trouble with that, because as
Nobody mentioned anything about the Indian Act. This is just straw man after straw man after straw man.
I was led to believe, the initial conversation was on restorative justice. If we're going to backtrack on that topic, okay.
Okay, we're not.
As Counterpoint is going to say, and again from watching Destiny's stream, as his point was, is going to be exactly the same as mine. You cannot talk about justice, representative justice, if you can't find out what you're doing a reparation from. You cannot say, well, we need representative justice here when you don't have a reason for it. So if you can't agree on the reasons why there needs to be reparative justice, then you can't talk about it. So this is perfectly legitimate to talk about what you need to do for reparative justice before you get there. Oh my head. I just no.
Backtracking on shit. If you want to talk about that topic, then start talking about that topic. But like seriously, all right. So I literally took 10 seconds to Google the word mass grave. It says a pit dug in the ground to receive a large amount of corpses. If a lot of bodies are buried individually because they're dead, then is a cemetery a mass grave?
Do you have evidence that they were all individually dug, according to Lauren?
Your own GPR that you stated is absolutely factual evidence that is showing by your definition, your lights, that there are apparently bodies that you can see with GDPR. Sorry, not GDPR, sorry, GPR. You're saying that the GPR that you're citing is actually stating that they are a graveyard, that they are not a mass graveyard, not a mass grave, but they are many graves in a cemetery style. There are many different plots that are buried separately. That is from your own factual basis that you brought up as definitive proof that you said proves bodies are there, surprisingly, But yet you're now coming out and saying that they show a mass grave. You obviously did no research whatsoever.
I'm
They
okay.
calculated that there were individual bodies with the GPR.
Lauren, I got it. I'm not
Lauren-
trying. Okay, let me not be a dick. Okay, I'm not going to be a dick. I'm just going to try to break it down. So
Are you both incapable of letting me finish a sentence?
I am
According to
perfectly
Lauren, only a few moments ago, we're talking about pits, right? According to Lauren, GPR is incapable of identifying bodies. So how would it know whether or not they were all buried at the same time?
Okay.
Because they show different grave plots. They show different impressions that look like grave plots. It's not a big pit. They are different graves. Or at least insinuate that they're different graves. Oh, I just can't. I just can't. And the sad thing is we still have over an hour left to go.
I'll address this because I'm not Lauren, if you want me to.
Feel free.
Okay. What I would say is that based off of all of the reading that I've made, there's plenty, and for the audience at fucking home again, I'm just trying to be descriptive. I'm not trying to justify. Okay? Trying to be descriptive so we can all get on the same page descriptively. All right? On the same page? Let's keep going. As far as I can tell, from what I've seen from the historical record of the Canadian residential school system, what happened was, let's just call it cultural genocide. They took kids forcibly from people's homes, brought them to a boarding school, forced them to all live together supervision because of poor conditions, malnutrition, and basically lack of supervision. Kids were abused. Kids had improper medical care. They had improper nutrition, and a bunch of them died from very, I don't want to say tuberculosis is an easily preventable disease, but from disease, okay? A significant chunk of them died from disease from the conditions that they were forced into, okay? We're conceding that point. Now, also, on top of that, a lot of them died in fires because these buildings were built like shit, okay? So a decent chunk of them died from fires. And then even on top of that, a lot of kids tried to escape because the conditions were so poor and they died from exposure. That is the historical record as far as I understand it. Now, if we're going to bring this down to the American level, I can tell you that the United States of America, especially before this, have mass graves, guaranteed. Because what we did instead is we just fucking killed Native Americans. Okay, so again, this is a spectrum of awful. I'm not trying to say it's good or bad. I'm just trying to be descriptive. So when we're talking about these graves, we're probably talking about kids who died either from tuberculosis, fire, or exposure, and they were probably buried after they were dead. Mass grave to me, because maybe I'm just a lay person, but mass grave to me implies that we are marching people out into an area, we're fucking killing them, and we're throwing them in a pit. That is my understanding of it. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's my understanding.
As opposed to digging a hole for all of the bodies of the kids who died in the fire that all happened at once?
Wow. Wow. Just wow. Absolutely wow. So, what? Oh, everybody died in a fire and we put them in a mass grave. But that's not what the GPR suggests. That you cited shows bodies. No wonder why you privated your Twitter. No fucking wonder.
Yeah, do you think that the priest set the fire, or do you think it was accidental? Because that's kind of important.
Do you think that there's no such thing as a mass grave at these residential schools using the conditions that you yourself just set on the restriction of the definition of that term?
Fine, Tail, you fucking win, okay? Maybe 7 kids were all buried at the same time and it's a mass grave. Can we get to the fucking descriptive part of it? Like, can we get back to like reality?
No, because you cannot give them the fact that mass graves exist. You cannot concede that point. Because once you concede that point, as Lance is smirking away there, it shows them that they won that argument, that there are mass graves. And if there's mass graves, everything else that they've mentioned before could be true. So you cannot concede that point. You just can't.
I would love to.
Can I please jump in here? Okay, I have a question for you. We're talking about the mass graves that the media have alleged happened, that Lance has been tweeting about, that progressives have been tweeting about, and you're saying that they are mass graves where people just dug pits, because I just want to let everyone know GPR technology can only find anomalies in the soil. It can't find bodies. So the way that they are trying to find, or how they claim they are trying to find these individual bodies or find these numbers, how they're getting the 250 number, how they're getting that 750 number, is they're saying they're finding burial spots and graves. And that's why some have also been mistaken for that. They said they were, Native children buried, but it ended up just being a graveyard. So if we're talking about GPR technology that is finding individual graves, and these are what is being called mass graves, they literally cannot be mass graves because it's only detecting individual burial spots. So no, this whole idea that you're saying that, yes, it was pits and bodies were thrown in. No, based on the technology that was used and the way they are counting and getting these numbers, it's impossible.
Nope, I've already conceded it. You can't take it back forever. That's the record now.
Okay, I see. All right, mass graves, whatever.
Okay,
but the reason we need to establish what crimes happened, to talk about retributive justice, is we need to know what the retributive justice we're discussing was for, right?
Sure,
that's why we're discussing
absolutely.
this.
Okay, so I'd like to answer that one for you. This is a question to both Counterpoints and Lauren. As of now, how many priests and nuns have been convicted for sexual crimes against children as a result of the residential school system?
I'm on the same page. If priests and nuns committed sexual assault against kids, put them in jail. But build a mass, never mind. But this shit happened in the US. This shit happened at boys' schools in Florida. This shit happened in Ireland. It was horrific. And I hope every one of those things is investigated. We don't disagree on that. And if it didn't happen, it should happen. What we're disagreeing on is whether churches should be burned down today and whether there were mass graves.
So, do you want to attempt answering the question? Because Lauren seems unable to.
What? How the hell is that her not answering the question? I know people are going to go, but she's a Nazi, or she's this, or she's that. She's literally said that I'm on the same page with you. This needs to happen. We're in support of it. We need to arrest these nuns, priests, and whatever that abuse these children. I'm with you. And then Lance, the Serfs, goes, well, Lauren can't answer the question. You mean you weren't expecting Lauren, the Nazi queen, to agree with you? I mean, again, I dislike Lauren. I don't mind admitting that. But at least be honest when you're having a discourse with you. Whether she's far right, middle right, alt right, whatever the hell she is, she's agreeing with you on a singular point. Take that and work together to get justice for the kids, right? Surely. But no. Lauren can't answer the question, even though she's agreeing with you. This is really a toss-up between who is the most stupidest on Lance's side on the left, between Lance, the Serfs, and Tower of Two Rabbits. This is...
Many? I don't know. How many?
No. I don't want to answer how many. I was going to back her up on a moral point. So no, please tell me.
Sure. No, I'm sure we're all against pedophilia. So as of now, there's been 40 convictions, and that means that there's been 37,951 complaints that have been levied. They have not been pursued. As of now, an estimated 5,000 priests, nuns, and teachers have committed sex crimes against these children, and they're not.
Right. I don't have the stats in front of me. I can't find the stats. If somebody wants to link them to me, please do. I will put them in a Google Docs myself, so that way it can be added to the doc. So if anybody wants it, they can add to it. But I cannot find the stats for this. But my question would be, how old are all of these complaints? If you have grandma and grandpa that's talking about something that happened in the 1920s, the people that they're actually going against are dead. That means that the state probably doesn't want to, and I don't mean it in a horrible way that it sounds, but to put money into that situation to try and get justice for somebody that doesn't actually have anybody to have justice against them. As in, I don't think that the government would chase after people that don't exist anymore. Now, you could argue that they should do, and there's probably a case for it. And I'm not necessarily against it. But saying, oh, well, the complaints are not being levied. It's like, okay, but why are they not being levied? Why are they not being chased? Or why are they not being inquired about? Is it all to do with cases that have happened in the last 10, 20, 30 years? Or is it ones that have happened many, many years ago that are almost decades old? Almost half a century, 50 to 60 to 70 years old. For anybody that does any sort of law and order, or just follows any law and order, any sort of rape, torture, abuse case is really hard to try when it happened the night before, let alone 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the line. That's not even getting into the actual case of historical allegations that need to be checked by word of mouth. They need to be checked by the records that have been kept or haven't been kept. So for Lance to try and bring this up as a point or a gotcha of in, oh, well, the government doesn't seem to be doing enough. The point is to that, or as Connor counterpoint should say to this, is how can they? Like, what do you want to happen here?
Not being charged for that. The first time anyone was put to task for this was in 2008, and that was somebody who had molested 17 boys, and that was the first major conviction. So this is what I mean when I say that there hasn't actually been retributive justice in this case, right? If we're dealing with thousands and thousands of priests, nuns, and teachers who had sexually molested children, that would be a place to start. I mean, unlike the Catholic churches, who at this point we do not know who's burning them down. In this case,
right, before we get onto the Catholic churches and things like that, right? Lauren and counterpoints agreed with you, Lance. You're virtue signaling. You're taking up dead air to already address and say what Lauren and counterpoints have already conceded to you. They want that type of justice to happen. You're just virtue signaling. Now, don't get me wrong. I think people should do about that, and they should actually go out of their way to say that this needs to happen. But when the other side in a debate has already conceded and said, we agree with you, there should be restorative justice in this instance, you're making a point out of nothing. They already agree with you.
we do know who committed these heinous crimes.
Okay, then to address this,
Yep.
this is where, like, again, I am not your enemy in this fight at all. So if anybody touched any kid of any background, used them, then what I think the system should do to them is not even fit for Twitch. Okay, and I don't care who that person is, what institution they're a part of, whether or not they're a member of my race, whether or not it was an institution supported by the government. Go after them with the full force of the law and punish them accordingly.
Would you both state that at this point the Catholic Church should stop withholding the names of those who may be guilty?
If you're talking about putting them public and you're saying maybe guilty, no, I don't think people on trial for sex crimes that haven't been confirmed guilty should be put public, because usually what happens is if they're found innocent or falsely accused, their lives get destroyed for something they didn't do. So until there is a crime and a conviction that happens, of course, keep the names private. But I think those convictions should be they should try to get those convictions if the person is guilty to the utmost of their ability. Now, we have to recognize, and this is a horrible thing, but it's very, very difficult to prove these crimes retrospectively that happened a long, long time ago.
Yep.
And if we're going to have a justice system at all, if we are going to have a system that says innocent until proven guilty, that has to be the standard. We can't just throw people in jail because we think we're just based on an accusation without proof. And, that sucks. It sucks that reality is like that. But you know what also sucks? People who did nothing going to jail for the rest of their lives for a sex crime they didn't commit. That's just,
Yeah, no, nothing wrong with what Lauren said.
That was a long, long time ago. I was still figuring out Windows 95 when the last of the boarding schools in Canada was closed. There were even still a few that are open today in the United States.
What's this got to do with what they've said?
We address that, keep up.
Then address it again.
Okay, not to mention, even a rape committed against anyone in the 90s would be very difficult to prove and get evidence for today. I'm not even sure when we started getting these systems in place for rape kits in Canada. Like, when did that even come about? I'd have to research that. But this is, it's very difficult to prove these historical cases.
I just want to address this point head on because I don't want to feel like we're dodging. Okay, so what we said was that during the early 20th century and during the late 19th century, there were brutal fucking conditions. And as these things became less and less acceptable, some of
Before Counterpoints continues, I want to really point out to anybody that's left-leaning or whatever, or supporters of Lance or supporters of Tower, Twin, Rabbit, whatever, notice that they are again conceding ground. They are trying to, as the old politics would say, or politicians would say, reach across the aisle to show you that they are on your side on that part. But yet, Lance and Rabbit do not seem to even grasp that. They're just trying to attack straw men or make points that they think are coherent, when they don't need to, because they've already got the other side to concede, rightly so, to their point. I don't see why this needs. Let's carry on.
These schools were turned over to native control. Some of these schools that ended in 1996, as Lance pointed out, that Lauren supposedly has a study for, that I don't have a study for, was literally just a fucking boarding school for Native American kids. Now, I can't prove to you that no sex abuse happened, because whenever there's fucking teenagers anywhere, fucking sex abuse happens.
Yep.
Sex abuse happened at my white suburban bullshit fucking school. Kids were doing cocaine in the fucking bathroom and having fucking sex. I can't tell you that nothing bad happens anywhere, okay? But what I can say is that if you wanted to pick a school that you wanted to live in as a fucking time traveler, then you wouldn't want to go to the one in the 1920s, because there was probably a significant chance that you would get your ass kicked and nobody would give a shit. You would die of tuberculosis, or you would die in a fucking fire. Whereas if you went to the boarding school in 1992 and it was Native American run and it was fucking, then basically there's a strong chance that it was just a normal boarding school with all of the boarding school problems that we have today.
So
that's what I'm saying.
Okay, so the key difference here, I just have one quick point.
Wait, no. What I'm talking about,
You think that the expert, guess who the expert is here, would actually be able to make a counterpoint to counterpoint, right? You would expect that. And Dylan, being a good moderator, is obviously at this point in time, and that's not butt kissing, he's actually realized that Rabbit was the one who posed the question and Counterpoints countered it. So it's only fair that Rabbit actually addresses it to counter the counter, right? Retort the retort. You know, debate. Let's see if he does.
So far, I just got the time. So far, Lauren has talked more than both Lance and Tail combined. So I want to make sure that I give Lance and Tail some time to speak uninterrupted for a little bit. Lance?
Sure. I just wanted to address counterpoints. The difference there between what you stated and what happened is that they didn't choose to go to these schools. They were taken and forced to go to these schools. So even if you do...
He's not saying that. He's saying that if you were a time traveler, you would expect that the 90s school would be more in line with today's standards than what the standards were in 1920s. Even at the peak standard, the white suburban standard, the posh totty classes that you would go to, so to speak, you would still get beaten with a cane. You'd still have a high chance of getting TB. You'd still have a high chance of all of this stuff happening. Now, admittedly, it was far worse for the reservation schools. It was far, far worse. But his point was that one of these things is not like the other. And Lance still just goes back to, yeah, but there was still reservation schools and they were different and they were being taken away from their families. He's like, he knows. He's pointing out the difference from the time zone, not condoning them.
You say that there are institutions in which there are multiple people committing sex crimes and whatever that is. This is still a situation in which the children were forcibly removed from their parents and forced to be in these schools. So again, as wards of the state, everything that occurs to them is the responsibility of either the Catholic Church or the government of Canada.
Okay, let's get to the meat of this real quick, because no one's denying bad things happen. No one's denying bad things are bad.
Exactly.
The only disagreement here is you guys seem to think there were mass graves. There's no evidence for them. Do you still think there are mass graves after this discussion? How many bodies have been exhumed at these graves that have recently been discovered?
So that seems to be...
I personally don't like the way that Lauren Southern did this. Now, admittedly, to confirm something, you would need to do the investigation to confirm it. I admit that. I understand what Lauren is actually going down. I understand the argument. But I don't like the rhetoric behind this. I don't like the analytics. I don't like the way that it looks. Because at this point in time, you're trying to say that there isn't even a graveyard that's there. Now, admittedly, on her worldview, she's trying to say that you don't know if they were just kids in general. You don't know if they were settler kids. You don't know if it was a mixture. You don't know what the whole amount was there. You don't know if the whole 215 or the 715 was all Indigenous people. I get what her argument is. That's not what my beef is, if you want. It's the case of... You're trying to minimize the point of the graves were found. And I don't know, it just doesn't look good optically for you. Like, at this point in time, in general, in my opinion, now everybody may be wrong, or I may be wrong on this, sorry, but personally, I don't think Lauren has come across as being too bad or too insensitive at this point. You could argue that when she used the word unfortunate, maybe, as other people have pointed out, that maybe that was a bit bad on optics. But for me, this is worse.
The only thing that you're trying to propose is your conditions. But if you didn't listen to what Dylan just said, he said that you'd spoken the most in this debate, and so he was going to give Tail, Twin Rabbits a chance to speak.
Right. Admittedly, right? Okay, fair enough. But Lauren said, "Can I ask a question?" and didn't let her ask a question. Lance's smug face right there says everything you need to know. I got one over on Lauren because I told her to be quiet. I mean, way to go, dog, way to go. You've done so well.
Okay, he's happy to. I was just trying to get back on topic and then to the church
Your
burnings,
topic, but yeah.
Well,
if
Tail,
that's the topic we agreed on.
Okay. Tail, if you want to speak, you can. You're free to speak.
At this point, I'm a little bit lost. There's been a
So surprised. He's a little bit lost. I wonder if he's going to talk about GPR again. Let's find out.
lot of philosophical quibbling over the definition of the word mass grave.
Says the person who said mass means many. Interesting.
The point where someone had to Google it because they didn't even know the definition coming into the game, which I think is a little inappropriate. If you're going to be discussing a topic, you should at least be mildly prepared.
How disingenuous. How disingenuous. Oh, you had to Google the term mass grave before coming into the debate. Says the guy who said mass means many. Either you are being absolutely, I mean this wholeheartedly, absolutely dishonest, or you are thick. You are absolutely thick. If you think that this is anywhere near a coherent point. The reason why Counterpoint used Google was to settle the definition because you guys wouldn't settle or state your position was until you then said mass means many. Just goddamn.
And when we're talking about things like ground penetrating radar, I again go back.
Oh,
If we're
lovely.
going to challenge the findings of those who have done the research, then you're challenging the foundation of archaeology in the Americas.
And
If
the
you would like to
Americas.
do that and lay out your argument for a better technique for identifying locations that should be excavated, I welcome you to do so. You haven't proposed anything remotely resembling that. What you did instead was to say that you went to school with a person whose name you can't pronounce, who is somehow vaguely related to a company who's oddly not listed anywhere on the company's prospectus. That's not terms, that's not definitions, and that's certainly not facts. That's just random anecdotes.
I have just
Before Lauren and then Counterpoints comes into it, I just want to point out that his grasping of not doing any research or how quiet he's been, you would have maybe expected him maybe to have gone, well, is it Sarah Bilu or whatever her name is that Lauren mentioned? Is she actually this person that did the Kaloops excavation or the GPR? Was she the one that actually did this? Is Lauren actually right or is it wrong? You know, because if Lauren was wrong and you literally did the name and then you said, I have a citation proving that Lauren is wrong, don't you think that would blow her out of the fucking water? Or did you not do any research beforehand and then you started to and then went, oh shit, she's actually done hers? Because I mean it in a nice way. I really do mean it in a nice way. You tried to portray yourself as being somebody who is an expert. That you talk about the Native America's history. You talk about the US and you talk about the Indigenous Canadians. You talk about their history. You talk about the archaeology. You play all their games. You do all of this. You do all of that. And you didn't even take the time to work out who actually did the GPR scans for Kamloops. Really? I just
Posted the
Lauren,
article
hold on, I
in the
got this.
chat.
Lord, please, for the love of God. Tale of Twin Rabbits. I'm pretty sure your brain is running on 1995, okay? We're fucking 30 minutes into this goddamn debate talking about, like, I don't know, terms about fucking murder and descriptive reality and history and all that kind of shit. And you want to talk to Lauren about fucking GPR and whether or not she can offhand fucking come up with a new way to conduct anthropology? I don't give a shit. Fucking catch up. Because basically what you're doing right now is you're acting smarter than everybody else in the fucking room while saying absolutely fucking nothing. If you want to take your fucking galaxy brain fucking 10 head and your individual experience, then please educate us. But if I have to hear fucking Lauren's a dumbass about GPR one more fucking time for 35 fucking seconds, I'm gonna fucking lose it. So either educate us, talk about the subject, keep up with the fucking conversation, or just don't bring up GPR again, because I don't give a fuck and I don't trust Lauren to reinvent anthropology in the next fucking 10 minutes. Okay,
Well,
let's
by the
move.
way, I just really need to make the point that I am not making this up. I'm inciting.
No,
the woman who
no,
did the
Lauren,
research.
Lauren.
Okay, sorry.
Please, in the future, do not do that. Okay,
Yes, sir.
Rabbits, I want you to respond to Connor. He said a lot. Or if you want to respond, it's completely up to you.
I mean, if he needs to take a little break and get a glass of water, that's fine. I have no.
what a disingenuous absolute asshole. Made all these points. Admittedly, maybe he was a little bit bitchy, but made all of these points. Oh, I just think he needs to take a break. He's obviously letting it get to him. Really, dude? Just go. But you don't even need to be here.
Objection.
Okay, I want to throw it over to Lance since again, the time is extremely lopsided at the moment. I'm sure.
Yes, because only one of
Lance,
Lance's
do you wanna say anything?
people is talking.
Well, just to
It's
counterpoint
not Tyler Twin Rabbits.
statement there, if Lauren is making the assertion that she believes, in this case, that this technology is not representational of the fact that there are mass graves, or perhaps we're lost again in the semantics of what constitutes mass.
No, you're just too fucking goddamn thick to understand that she's not even talking about GPR as in it can't find bodies because it can't. She's saying, I'm so annoyed at the minute. I'm jumbled up. Lauren's saying that GPR cannot find bodies. It can, and this is her own words, determine that there are points of interest to excavate. She actually said that in one of her opening statements. Right at the beginning. She's also linked to the different aspects of her actually saying that we need to excavate because it looks like there's graves. So when you two idiots are going out of your way to say, oh, well, Lauren's being disingenuous here because she's obviously trying to lie about what GPR is and obviously trying to redefine it. It's like, no, she's literally citing what people have said and what the stories have said. It's you guys that don't actually seem to know. But let's carry on.
Mass grave, then that is not on Tail to have to educate anyone on. He simply
Yes, it is. You're claiming, or he is, that there are mass graves. That means that you need to put forward why something is a mass grave. If it is your assertion, Lance, you goddamn child, you need to provide evidence of what your claim is. If you say these bad things happened in these places, you need to go, well, this is what happened, here's my evidence everywhere for it. If somebody says, well, Lauren said this about GPR, show the evidence for it. If you think that it can find mass graves and bodies, show evidence for it. Don't sit there and hide saying, oh, it's not my job to educate you. If it's not, why the fuck are you here trying to debate the topic? God damn.
stating that she is putting into question the findings, which have already been agreed upon, by the way, by most of Canadians. This is not something that's being disproven. This is, again, being stuck in semantics. And I can see Lauren's losing her mind in the
yes,
process
because
of
you're
hearing
being
this.
disingenuous.
There's a reason why multiple people, including everyone here's favorite Justin Trudeau, has come forward and stated that, yes, we'd like to apologize for this. We have acknowledged that this was genocide, that it is an ongoing process. He's become the first sitting prime minister to say that.
If you watch the Destiny stream that's linked in the description box down below, Destiny does a lot more research into Lance and what Lance says. I just don't trust anything that he actually says in general, but Destiny actually goes out of his way to say and prove that Justin Trudeau did not say it the way that Lance is saying. So, again, I'm not surprised that somebody's being disingenuous. And it's somehow not the Nazi Queen. But yet everybody said that Dylan shouldn't platform the Nazi Queen because she peddles misinformation. It's amazing that, isn't it? Like the person who's been classified as pushing misinformation hasn't, but yet the two people that are supposed to be the ones, well, one actually claimed that he was basically a fucking goddamn expert, and the other one's been tweeting about it for goddamn weeks and months, claiming that, going on different channels and claiming like he knows what's going on and it's for his brothers and everything else like that. Doesn't even know what was found at the actual sites. Doesn't know the difference between schools that happened in 1907 and the when one closed in 1996, 90 years later. Doesn't know the difference. But yet, those are the ones that are apparently pushing the correct information, but the Nazi Queen is a litany of misinformation. You know, it's really bad when somebody as bad reputation of Lauren comes out and absolutely stomps you on providing evidence for what she's claimed. Because so far, whether you agree with her framing of it or not, she is not factually wrong. But yet you two are, and can't even follow a conversation. You keep on trying to grasp onto these same talking points, but yet have been addressed countless times in that own debate. Carry on.
I'm no fan of Justin now, where this is not something that is being, let's just say, debated. But I'll leave the tail to finish that.
Phil and I understood that the topic was supposed to be retributive justice, and we still haven't talked about that.
So talk about it, Robbie.
Can I respond?
Yeah.
Just a 2-second response here.
Sorry,
No.
Or
Hold on.
not.
Just
Okay, I
hold
thought
on.
you were done. Okay, you can continue.
Well, I got interrupted there by counterpoints for just a moment. I was willing to let him finish, I suppose. But in any case, I'm not particularly interested in educating you. If you would like to talk to me after, then that's fine. I'd be happy to provide you plenty of information.
You're in the middle of a debate. You can't hide behind, oh, you can talk to me afterwards. You're in the middle of a debate talking about the topic that apparently is really important to you, so important to you that you want to debate it. But apparently, it's not your jobs to educate other people on what you deem to be a fucking genocide. You guys deem it to be a genocide, but it's not your goddamn job to educate people that disagree with you that you believe a genocide is occurring. You either are completely and utterly stupid, or you are disingenuous in your framing of how you think something is going on, and you can't prove what you assert. I hope for your case it's more of the latter rather than the former, but I think it's a mixture of both. But let's carry on.
Information on the subject of ground penetrating radar. I know it frustrates you when I say that term.
Yes, because you
I'm
don't
not
understand what's
concerned
been talked
with
about.
that. And that wasn't what the thesis of my statement actually was. I said we're quibbling over definitions because I haven't been confronted with any facts. So that's my concern. If you would like to somehow contradict what I said there, you may feel free to do so.
They've
But as
provided
I
lots
understood
of
it, the
different
topic here was
facts.
about retributive justice. So I would like to know what the two of you mean when you talk about that so that we can discuss it.
Okay,
I'm
Connor,
not
don't
interested in discussing
dare
it.
mansplain.
Okay, I'm gonna mansplain.
Don't
Oh,
you
wait.
dare. Give me 1 minute because I just really need to respond to this one point. It's we have to determine if there was a genocide or not because that was part of this topic. So that's why we are discussing this. And I really need to respond to the fact that Lance and Tale of Twin Rabbits have just spent their whole last chat talking about how I have not provided any proof, and I'm trying to reestablish the whole field of archaeology and anthropology, and that I've made this up. That is not true. I've linked to the Globe and Mail article in our Discord chat, and this is what the researcher who found the initial graves that sparked this all off said. My findings cannot be confirmed unless excavations are done, which is why we need to pull back a little bit, and they are probable burials. They are targets of interest for sure, said Dr. Bellio, who has about a decade of experience in the field, including working with the RCMP. She said the sites have multiple signatures that present like burials, but we do need to say that they are probable until one excavates, because we actually don't know the story behind them. We don't know if there's even bodies in there. We don't know if this is an overgrown graveyard, and these are the facts. I'm citing the researcher. This is not something I'm making up, and you guys need to stop asserting that.
Yes.
Sure.
So-
can I respond to that? or-
Yes, I just want to make it very clear. I see Connor raising your hand. I really want to give some, and I'm going to. This is the last time I'm going to do it. So please take advantage of the opportunity that you guys have. Like the difference in speaking time is very great right now. So I want to make sure that both sides are probably represented. Lance,
Right. Very, very quickly, a lot of people actually tried to call Dylan out on this. But as I said before, remember that one of the rules was a similar chess timer. And one of the rules was trying to make sure that both parties had an equal time or equal footing of time. So this is the reason why Dylan keeps on trying to push the experts of the matter, the ones that are advocating for this, to, I don't know, advocate for this. And Dylan has to actually keep on prompting them to advocate for it. Just saying.
the floor is yours.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so when it comes to the finding of the children, what you're doing, Lauren, is you're not presenting any facts. What you're doing is
It's literally facts, Lawrence. It's literally goddamn. It's literally goddamn fact. It. Carrying on.
that you're trying to selectively use parts of an article, the Globe and Mail article, I have it before me right now, in order to assert a conspiratorial claim. Now, if
It's not conspiratorial to say that the person who led the actual GPR that you're citing proves mass graves, that categorically states that these are not mass graves and are most likely a former graveyard, to, in the same article, talks to the chief of the local tribe that says, yes, it seems to be a former graveyard. We know this as a graveyard. You have the article in front of you. This, as you said. So this obviously means that you're a fucking liar and are being disingenuous, Lance.
if we look at, let's say, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, all right, which is the largest study that has ever been done in this field, it is one that was started in 2008. It cost over $1
So he starts off saying that she's wrong about GPR and then completely and utterly goes, but we're not going to talk about that, even though I know that I have the article in front of me. I'm going to go and quickly shift it to something else that is apparently remotely related. Okay.
$100 million to do, and it was one that interviewed thousands upon thousands, again, of Indigenous survivors who'd experienced the horrors and atrocities of the residential schools. The consensus and the broad consensus by this commission was overwhelmingly that not only did this constitute genocide, but that there was multiple children who had died at these schools, and yes, were buried near the schools themselves.
Yeah, it was considered genocide because they changed the definition of genocide. Again, if you watch Destiny's stream, he's gone through this with one of Lance's supporters or fans or whatever, and actually went through all of that with him and actually went through the definitions and how it's actually changed and things like that. I should have really have linked it down below, but I'm sure you can find it on Destiny's channel. It shouldn't be too hard to find. So what he's actually saying there is technically true, but only because in Canada they changed the definition of what genocide means. By changing the definition and how they have done, as Destiny and I think Counterpoint is going to bring up very shortly, the way that they've changed it would mean definitionally that how things are going in America and how they've systemically treated people of color in America would technically classify as a genocide. So go and watch that Destiny stream with a fan of the Serfs, I believe is part of the title, and he goes through all of that.
This was part of the findings of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So what you're trying to do, and what you often do, and what I'm sure Rebel News has taught you very well to do, is to try and take
completely and utterly ad homs. I don't want to keep on fucking trying to defend her, because again, I don't fucking like her. But you started off saying that you're wrong about GPR, even though I have the article in front of me. Didn't bring up the article, didn't try and refute her with the article, dodged that, moved on to, well, this says this, and now saying that, oh, well, whatever you say anyway is going to be wrong because you've been taught to take a narrative from Rebel News and twist it into making your own sort of narrative from it. So whatever you say anyway is going to be horribly, horribly wrong. Now, again, with Lauren Southern's actual reputation, you can get away with this if you're on the left. But if you actually check what she's actually done and what she's actually cited here, rather, you will actually see that she's actually correct. So she's being the more honest person out of Lance and Tower 2 Rabbits. Interesting turn of events, Batman.
Selective parts of an article like you have here in the Golden Mail, and then utilize that to try and extrapolate a theory. And that's just not going to cut it in terms of what we're talking about now. I think eventually we should move on to the idea of Catholic churches, because that's something you wanted to talk about. But one of the final points that I wanted to move on to, if you want to talk about Canadian genocide and talk about the process, is move on to the childcare and the foster care system. But I see Cameron points his hand up, so let him talk.
Yeah.
Okay, wait.
Please.
One more time. I just want to give one last opportunity to tell Connor. Law and order. Okay. I just want to give one last opportunity to tell two rabbits to speak at this point.
He's a little bit annoyed. I can't blame him.
Rabbit.
I'm fine. Counterpoint seems very interested to go.
Okay, Connor.
Remember, this is the fucking guy that at the beginning said, I'm an indigenous person, or I support indigenousness by, I don't know if I can say that. I'm somebody that supports indigenous media. I play their games, I watch their shows, I play their games, whatever. I then go on to he then goes on to say, I also look into their history and talk about the archaeology. So, would you like to have a conversation about the Canadian genocide? Sure. Have you got anything to say on the topic? Well, Lauren's wrong about GPR. Okay, anything else? No, I'm good. I think the other guys have got more interested in talking. Motherfucker, this is supposed to be what you're advocating for. The genocide of the people that you support the most. Again, no wonder why you fucking privated. You should delete your Twitter. But no wonder why you privated your Twitter. You disingenuous hack.
Thank you. So you said no facts were given. But basically what I would say is Lauren and I have come at you with a bunch of descriptive facts. And not only that, they fit a shitload of your narrative. You've already said that there's probably a few thousand students that died in the residential school system. As a matter of fact, the current official estimate from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission puts it about 4,300, okay? Based off of the narratives collaborated, or whatever the fuck the word is, at the Truth and Reconciliation, it was largely poor conditions, disease, abuse, exposure, and fire. Those are the majority of the things. The primary contention that I've had historically in this entire conversation is whether or not we should use the term mass graves, which I get is a little bit pedantic for Tale of Two Rabbits or whatever. But at the same time, when somebody says mass graves to me, I'm assuming and executing them and then shoving them into a ditch and then throwing fucking dirt on them. And as I've already conceded, if that was reality, then I would be doing some fucked up shit right about now. Okay? And it's not that any of this is not awful, but there's a spectrum of fucking awful. So whenever I'm trying to be accurate descriptively and I'm presenting these facts to you, these facts that are like agreed upon by the people who support your narrative, the reason why I'm doing that is because I don't want people to go out there and say there are mass graves in Canada. There's 4,000 kids that were discovered, and basically the Canadian government has been committing genocide. Oh shit, that sounds fucking awful. That sounds like the fucking Canadian mountain police walked a bunch of kids out into the woods and shot them in the back of the head and threw them in shallow ditches. That's what people think when you say that shit. So when I'm being descriptive and I'm being pedantic and I'm trying to boil out these fucking definitions, it's because when people say that shit, they have emotional and mental and logical justification to go throw Molotov cocktails at shit. But when you say instead that there were horrific conditions, the Canadian government committed cultural genocide, it was not addressed up until like 1996. On top of that, there's systemic issues that extend into the modern day that are unaddressed, that Canadians only seem willing to reconcile with right now. That's a massively different narrative. Now, maybe the anger still needs to be there. Maybe the passion still needs to be there. Maybe the Reformation still needs to be there. But at the same time, it's not the same as mass execution of children. So that's where I'm being pedantic and annoying.
Sure. Yeah, I'd like to address that directly. So you've already acknowledged that under the conditions of the residential school system, every single death that occurs is because they are, again, wards of the state, right? So it doesn't matter if they're dying from tuberculosis, doesn't matter if they're dying from malnutrition, starvation, they're still deaths that are responsibility of the provincial or federal government, correct?
Okay, what I would say is, while not necessarily biting that bullet in full, I do think that it is their responsibility and it is their wrong.
See, that is a clever argument. And I'm not going to try and skirt around it and say, oh, no, it's not. It is actually quite a clever argument. Where it's like, well, okay, I completely and utterly agree with everything that you just said, but aren't they wards of the state? If all of them are wards of the state and all of them are having this happen to them or have aspects of this happen to them, then the Canadian government's at fault. If the Canadian government's at fault, then the fault lies with them. It's like, yeah, that means that it's a systemic problem and not necessarily a genocide. So What's your point?
Wrong. So I'm not trying to split hairs here. I'm trying to be very specific. Some of these things are not controllable. Okay, fires, tuberculosis, all that kind of stuff. Some of that stuff isn't controllable. But at the same time, there's something called liability, which means responsibility. The government was in charge of these people. The Native Americans whose children were forcibly taken by the government lost something that is very important to them. There's nothing more important to me in this world than my son. Okay, so since the Canadian government took children and either accidentally or negligently killed them, they owe the families whose children were killed something. Whether that's restorative justice, systemic change, all that kind of bullshit. We can talk about that in the next segment.
Yeah, sure. So it seems to me like it's just a point of disgust that you want to reach, right? So for you, it would be egregious and beyond the pale if the children were taken out into the back of the woods and they were shot in the face. That to you is like, okay, that justifies me burning down a church, apparently.
No, that's not what he's saying at all, Lance, you disingenuous fucking hack. He's saying that constitutes genocide. That constitutes the word genocide. That constitutes the word of using mass graves. The language in which you guys are using, that's what he's saying. That's what he pictures. And if that was happening, he'd be completely and utterly with you. He's not saying it would justify church burnings. He's actually saying, I would understand why it's causing church burnings. But because of your rhetoric of saying, oh, this is a genocide, and this is a mass grave, those connotations of those two words will automatically make people be annoyed and angry, and rightly so. The massive problem with that is you're so disingenuous, you can't even understand when he's actually conceding ground, and that's what really pisses me off.
Whereas I would say that in this condition, the things that happen, when the statistics show 1 in 5 of the children is sexually molested, that to me is horrifying enough in and of itself. Then I even have to bring up the other things. Again,
that doesn't make it a genocide. Admittedly, completely and utterly fucking atrociously wrong. No hesitation. Completely and utterly and absolutely wrong. Not a genocide. Not a genocide. Not a mass grave. These words mean something.
Those things include experimentation. Those things include torture. Things include physical and sexual abuse. All of which, to me, are beyond the pale. So it doesn't matter.
Agreed. All of the people in that room and all the people that are here, and I assume in my chat or whoever's watching this, completely and utterly agree with you that would be beyond the pale. But I don't think many people would classify that as a genocide.
To me, whether or not we're going to quantify this in this kind of strange scale of eyeballs, right? Which is more horrifying. Are they shot in the face, or are they all just sexually molested by priests? Either way.
No. One constitutes fucking genocide. The other constitutes systemic horrors. Not trying to sugarcoat it. One is absolutely horrific, but isn't a genocide. The other, being shot in the face and put into a ditch, is literally a genocide.
Again, as wards of the state, the Canadian government, the Catholic Church were responsible for overseeing their safety. They failed horrifyingly at that.
Okay, but
nobody disagrees, Lance. But it's not a genocide.
Descriptively, I know where you want to go, but I'm very excited. So basically, descriptively, this actually very closely compares to the BLM riots of the previous year. Okay, I can understand descriptively why riots are occurring. Systemic injustice, over policing, the drug war, like all that kind of stuff. I can understand descriptively why things are happening while not thinking that they're necessarily morally justifiable. So that's the same parallel that I would exactly draw to this thing, where I can understand that if your uncle or something like that was a part of the residential school system, he was sexually abused, and then in Catholic churches, and there's a Catholic church up the block, and you're either leftist who's sympathizing with Native Americans, or you're a Native American person yourself, why you would commit vandalism. I understand that descriptively, but I also think that it's based on some shittily communicated information, and that doesn't make it just, which I'm very happy to explore in the next segment, because basically once we get into the details of the next segment, I think you're going to kind of see why the reaction to this stuff is also fucked up.
Yeah, but see, I'm not here in favor of people destroying churches. I'm not here arguing, even if they were the victims, like I can understand why it's justifiable, but I'm not saying that is a fair course of action to be taken. I'm not here to justify people destroying churches. I mean, if that's where we're going to move, that's fine. I would start by saying at this time, we do not know who is burning the churches down.
We can have a really strong inference. Can we know definitively? No, not necessarily. But if news broke about these mass graves, by definition they're not mass graves, that's why I'm using that, but had been quoted in the media and quoted by Lance and quoted by other activists that they are mass graves and this is paramount to genocide, I can logically infer that people that would want to defend and be outraged by this are not Catholics, probably mostly not right-wingers, probably, though there could be, but probably has a higher chance of them being Indigenous people or people that are activists and support what is going on with the Indigenous people. You can logically infer that there are steps that logically follow of why you would have an inductive reasoning because of it.
Okay, I wanted to throw it over to Lauren because Lauren's waiting a little bit. Then I'll throw it over to Tail afterwards.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question for you, Lance, is whether you think these church burnings are justified, because I made a video on the church burnings and you obviously responded with a long response where you claimed that my video condemning the church burnings was further victimizing the Indigenous community because I was blaming them for it, something I never asserted once in my entire video. So, it may have been easy to debate a straw man version of me, but now I'm actually here.
Doesn't matter, Lauren. He's still debating a straw man of you, and it doesn't matter for counterpoints either because he's still debating a straw man of you. As for Tower of Two Rabbits, GPR. I think that covers everything that he said.
I actually think it's a lot of progressives doing it, and we can't say we don't know who are doing these burnings when people are literally signing off graffiti and activist messages. These are clearly progressive activists that have been inspired by the highly exaggerated talk of mass graves, which some of which, like ones found in Kelowna, in BC anyways, were just graveyards that were overgrown but called mass graves.
Is it definitive?
So we know these are activists.
No.
We know they're being invigorated by false and exaggerated news. Do you condemn that? And do you condemn the church burnings and attacks in general?
Yeah,
Okay, so that was a direct question to Lance. I'm going to let Lance respond, but then I want to go to Tail.
Okay, so first off, that was absolutely fascinating because you contradicted yourself mid-sentence. So that was something to behold.
Ow. Right. Let's continue.
Just stated at the very beginning that, like, I'm not going to search who's causing this. There's just no way of knowing. I wouldn't do that. Well, at the same time, mid-sentence, like, but we do know who's doing this because there are signs and activists committing these crimes and atrocities.
Again, that's not what she said. She's saying that we do not know definitively, but we can assume. Or we can say, I believe was her correct word. That's not saying, well, I know that this is true. She's saying, well, with the evidence, I can say that they are doing this. I can say that I think that you robbed me, whether I have evidence of it or not. That doesn't mean that you did. It's just a case of saying that I can say with a logical inference. But why am I surprised that you can't actually grapple with anything that they've actually said?
Still, even if you have signs and even if you have revelations, excuse me, I'm speaking, we're going to finish this. Even if you do have signs, even if you do say that, yes, at the end of the day, this must be Antifa, or this must be an Indigenous community who's doing it, we would still need to have direct evidence of that. We would still need to have individuals who are arrested. We'd still need to have testimonies. We'd still need to have a single, like, criminal conviction in this regard.
Yes, to definitively say that they are this group of people or groups of people doing it. But nobody is sitting there, including myself, and saying we definitively know that people that are supportive or sympathetic to these situations that are going on are activists that are going out and doing something about it. Nobody's saying that definitively, but logically, who the fuck else is it going to be?
And when it comes to these schools, these Catholic churches burning down, yes, I do condemn them. I'm not here to defend people burning down religious institutions. That's not what I'm here to defend.
Okay, I'm going to throw it over to Tail, and that was directed at Lauren, so we'll bring it back to Lauren.
Well, I do also find it interesting that we keep trying to move this definition of what was an acceptable level of death, like whether or not the fires at these residential schools can be attributable to some sort of nefarious intent. And my answer to that would be, well, maybe if they hadn't had the removal policy in the first place, then those kids wouldn't have died in those fires. But
it's so disingenuous. That's still a case of, okay, we can talk about the Removal Act and say that that's a bad thing. Nobody's going to say that that's a good thing necessarily, and we could even agree that it's a cultural genocide. We could agree with that. I actually think the counterpoints would agree with that. I'm not too sure about Lauren, and I don't want to put words in her mouth. I'm sure other people would like to put lots in their mouth, but that's not for me. So when he comes out and actually says, oh, well, we cannot, that doesn't count as intentionality. How can it? Just because you took them somewhere, that doesn't mean that you're going to fucking burn them afterwards. If I take my kid to school and I crash my car on the way, that doesn't mean I intentionally took the kid to school to crash.
it is a curiosity to me that we do keep talking about these church fires. The church fires have been happening since long before the information came out about these kids. I mean, for example, in November 1st, Ontario churches that were roughly 10 minutes apart, they were both set on fire. There was a series of arsons that were attributable to a man who was apparently arrested over COVID violations just the week before the news was released. That was, by the way, attributed by Rebel News to cultural Marxists who were trying to rebel against mask regulations.
So this is what you would naturally call a deflection tactic, why are we talking about these church burnings? Because it was happening beforehand. It's a case of trying to say, well, people were getting stabbed like a lot beforehand. Like, it doesn't really matter if we can see a genuine increase because of a certain event before that happened, but they were happening before. So it doesn't really mean that because of that event that they're going up, because they were always happening anyway. It doesn't logically follow. Like, there's a reason why it spiked. And it spiked. So this is the worst debate that I've ever actually watched. And I'll be honest with you guys, I watch shit tons of debates. And one of my favorite ways of going to sleep is by watching flat earth debates. And it's not to pick on flat earthers, because they actually believe wholeheartedly in what they believe in. And that's absolutely fine. You can be wrong, but I can respect you because you heavily believe in it. You believe in it totally. These guys can't even defend what genocide and mass graves are. And as soon as they're pushed up on it, they just push it aside and say, well, it doesn't matter. What you say is wrong, and prove your definition rather than proving mine. All I've seen from this whole debate is obfuscation, prevarication, and just simple dodging. If I could be bothered to put this in a video, there would be Piccolo from Team 4-Star telling Gohan to dodge.
So what is it we're talking about right now? I'm not in favor of church burnings. I think it's bad because it tends to destroy the records of these kids who were murdered and tortured. I think it's a bad idea overall, but I'm not seeing any evidence whatsoever that it somehow sprang fully formed from the forehead of Antifa 5 minutes after they found out that something was amiss at the residential schools. People have known what was going on with the residential schools for years. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission came out in 2016. So we've had plenty of time to process this information. Why are...
I'm sure other people are going to mention this, but the reason why we're mentioning it now is because it is now being pushed heavily. It is a topic that's being debated. Hence why you are having this debate now, because it is in the foreground of being discussed by society, specifically the Canadian society, and now my society. But in general, it's specifically being debated at the minute. You're debating it. So to say, oh, well, it doesn't really matter, it's been here for ages, it's like, yeah, but the story may have been there for ages, but momentum is picking up now because of the stories that have happened before. The momentum is now. That's the reason why it's now obviously being produced, especially from, I believe, when, what is it, Kamloops, sorry, the 215 graves site that was found. Once that actually happened, I believe that's when the spike started to occur. And as Lauren has said before, there's literally graffiti on there saying about the numbers to do with the church on the churches when they're being burnt down. So the logical inference would be, oh, you put those numbers down on there, definitely must be right-wingers quoting scripture.
Are we suddenly worried about all of the church burnings? They've been happening for quite a while now.
By the way, this wasn't a secret to Indigenous communities. Like, this was one of the things where it was a revelation to Canadians.
Lance, I said that Lauren would be next. I'll get back over to you, but I won't born.
Yeah, there, even the mainstream media, even if you go look at the most leftist sources, they're not denying that there is a link between these church burnings and the recent reports. Why? Because the media headlines, even the mass graves, which the media are asserting and exaggerating, are mass graves, and that's why this whole previous conversation was important. Of course it's linked. When you have 12 churches being about mass Indigenous graves, and the churches have writing on them that say save Indigenous children, the idea that you could assert this has no link and that it's just random church burnings, I think is very, very silly. And Connor, I see you're putting your hand up there.
I see. On Hippy Tippy, we usually have a hand raising rule, so I think I've kind of like done it like
we've all been doing
dogs, you know.
That's right. No, I'm not the dog.
So it's like what's a Pavlov? You know how Pavlov like made the dogs like twitch when he did a certain thing. It's kind of like that. So that's why I raised his hand. We're gonna go to Lance first and then Connor, since Lance was trying to speak earlier.
Yeah, I'm just going to quickly say that there has been numerous Indigenous chiefs as well as band members who have come out and emphatically condemned the church burnings. They've also stated that these churches were integral parts of their community. So I think to lay blame on any one person, especially again,
and the Pope completely and utterly condemned everything that happened. That doesn't stop the fact that Catholic priests still diddle children, does it?
Historically, it has all been proven to be a very dangerous practice. So in the event that the individual in this case is arrested, in the event that we have a testimony, in the event that we find out that it happens to be the dreaded communists or Antifa, in which case, yes, I will acquiesce and gladly say, well, now we have a reason to state this is the reason why this has occurred. Again, I'd like to say emphatically that this was not news to Indigenous communities. This was not a new revelation. They have known for generations. The majority of the families of children who had died in residential schools were told by those schools that their children ran away. That was like, if you listen to the testimony of the people who have experienced this, in the vast majority of those cases, those kids, if they did run away, which sometimes they were just killed in school themselves, they would have died on the journey. Many of them drowned, many of them froze. So it's not a case of all what this did do was this did reveal everything to Canadians. Polls came out afterwards that 2/3 of Canadians had no idea about residential schools before any of this occurred. And yes, I think that is a good thing that they've learned about this entire horrifying part of our history. But that doesn't mean at that same time you can simply state that the blame of this was going to be laid on any one person.
Okay.
Okay, Connor.
Thank you. And part of the reason why I keep raising my hands is because you keep ringing the dinner bell and you keep taking away my fucking dog bowl. All right. So, goddamn. Okay. I hate asking questions in debates because I'm not trying to fucking gotcha you. But if we were just trying to logically think about it, as far as factional groups within Canada, okay, we have the conservative Canadians. They're probably not doing it. I think that's safe to say, especially if they're Christian. We have, maybe we have Satanists. Maybe all the Satanists have gotten on like a Reddit forum and they're just like, fuck churches, all specifically right now. Fuck churches, right? Maybe that happened. Who fucking knows, right? Somebody go check 4chan.
Definitely what's happening.
But the fucking lines that I'm drawing here seem very straightforward. That upsetting news about the residential school system has been released and been the focus of media attention for at least the past couple of years. That's why we're talking about it right now, because it's relevant. Regardless of whether or not it's pissed off Indigenous folk or people who sympathize with them, is kind of a moot point. But I think here to be like, you have to find evidence that this is the prime motivator. Why? Who else would be doing it besides people who saw the news, got pissed off, and decided they wanted to do something about it? I'm not talking about whether or not it's good or bad. I'm just saying, why are we trying to play hide the ball here about who's doing what and why?
Yeah, because I'm not stating that we have to ignore what the prime motivator would be. I'm sure you can make that assertion. I'm saying that we cannot claim or lay blame on any one group until we found out who exactly is doing it. You can state, here's why I think what is the reason why it is. But
that's what they
I
did.
think it's been very dangerous for people who attribute to this. Say, like, I've heard online that a lot of people consider this to be Indigenous activists, right? That they were bringing these churches out of anger and malice. I've heard a lot of people suggest that it may be, as you both have, far leftist groups who are doing the exact same thing. You can attribute who you think the blame may lay at, but until we know who has done it, I don't think we can definitively say or claim in this debate.
Lance, nobody is claiming that it is definitively anybody. They are logically inferring by following a simple pattern of 1 + 1 = 2 that if people are showing that they are annoyed because of the momentum is now picking up because of the mass graves that have apparently been found, and people are writing on churches, save Indigenous children, and then putting up the numbers of the mass graves that have apparently been found, then logically, that wouldn't be Catholic Christians on the right burning down their churches. It's just a logical inference of the impossibility of the contrary. That only leaves that group that it could be. Now, does that mean it is? No. But you can logically infer and say, I think it's them. And that's all that both of them and even the media are doing.
Here's who is the responsible party, and here's why you have contributed, or the leftists have contributed, or the media has contributed towards an atmosphere that resulted in these churches being burnt down.
Sure. And actually, I want to address this head on because this kind of gets into justice, right? So for me, the same way that you're asking that, like, hey, left-wing groups, it could be some individuals in the left-wing groups that are doing this, but left-wing groups in general probably aren't doing this as a policy. And as a matter of fact, there's people in left-wing groups and Indigenous circles that are actually discouraging these behaviors, and they're not trying to encourage them. They're actually saying, this is fucked up, please stop. It's
the vast majority of bands and chiefs who've come out have spoken against it.
Awesome. So when we move this conversation into justice, basically what I would assert is that this is where I would want to see justice meted out. So on a, I don't want to say an individual level, but almost on an individual level. So for instance, you were talking about priests that did the molestation.
I'm sorry, counterpoints. If you're watching, or you watch it over later, or whatever, I'm not saying it's the individual level, but on the individual level, I'm not going to say you played yourself, but you did well.
should be investigated, prosecuted, and convicted, right? Whether maybe the church should consider paying restitution to people who are proven to be victims or some shit like that, okay? Maybe the government should try to address systemic issues in order to help people out,
yeah,
okay? Especially people who are specifically affected by these issues.
Yep, definitely.
I think that's all well and good. What we're trying to avoid.
Do you know what the funny thing is? I don't think Lauren disagrees. I don't think any of you disagree with that statement. But yet, that is the statement that they have made since the beginning of the debate. Almost an hour and 20 minutes ago, not from my stream, but from theirs, that they were talking about the concessions of they need to talk about this justice. But yet, so dogmatic in their own views about what they believe to be true that they won't accept the concession that's already been made.
Just actually very specifically through this conversation, or at least what my goal would be, is avoiding a cultural, ethnic, linguistic, and religious civil war in our liberal democracy. And the thing is, Canada's reckoning with this right now. America's not even fucking close to reckoning with any of this shit. Whether we're talking about Native American affairs, slavery, like any of that kind of shit, we're not even close to starting to describe to each other the actual historical wrongs that we have done to each other.
Yeah.
So I want to get into this in a second, but I understand that you guys have asserted repeatedly that there's an ongoing genocide. I would probably contend with that definition, but you can say that there's systemic issues or whatever, but I would see the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which we have stats on all the initiatives that they have started already. I would actually see that as the fucking gold standard of transparency. It's actually incredible what they've done.
Yeah.
Now, is it completely accurate? Maybe not. Is everything productive? Probably not. But as far as actually going to the root of the problem, coming up with descriptors, coming up with policy, and then trying to implement it, it's fucking amazing.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to get into that in a second.
Yeah, I'm actually just genuinely surprised with that response, because we've just been throwing all these spicy shots. But I agree with most of what you said, and I think it's actually a very constructive way of dealing with this problem. At the end of the day, what has upset me most, especially with Lauren's video, is that I think this idea of suddenly talking about the moral outrage at the church burnings, which I agree, burning of religious institutions is something to be.
So he completely not agrees with everything that's just been said, and then he's like, "Well, we should drop all the spicy shots." But I disagree with Lauren's video because, and it's just like. Okay, so you didn't mean what you just said? Okay, fair enough. Maybe I'm misinterpreting that. I don't know, but it seems really petty. You just found common ground, and now you're just switching it around and going to attack Lauren on another point, which I don't even think is really a point, but we'll carry on.
Astounded at is trying to change the narrative from something that is an ongoing crisis in this country, which is the treatment of hundreds of thousands of Indigenous people. And that is the thing that we should be talking about. That is the thing we should be concentrating on, and that is the thing we should be addressing. So I think that, yes, it is horrifying that churches are burning down, but I don't want anyone to lose the concentration that things like discovering of dead children, buried children, Indigenous and residential schools, if this is where suddenly the public conscience has come, and this is what we're talking about, then let's utilize this as an opportunity to start talking about the issues of cultural genocide that are occurring to Indigenous people today.
Okay, I'm going to respond since you talked about my video. Lance, I watched your video and you actually liked the beginning of my video because I did not ignore the problems that happened in residential schools. I discussed them. You liked that aspect. Where you didn't like it was when I started talking about the church burnings. And these are not, these problems cannot just exist. You can talk about both problems.
The problem with this is that for some reason, Lance wants to completely and utterly separate the two issues. For me, they're conjoining. One's happened because of another. So because of bodies being found, because of what people believe has happened, they have gone on to burn the churches. It's a chain of events that have led to a final point. So if you're going to talk about one aspect and then you're trying to bring it forward to today, they are intrinsically linked. If you can concede that there's a possibility, as you did, that it could be, from logical inference, that people are doing some sort of form of retribution, whether it's right or wrong, it's a case of, well, these things are now linked then, aren't they? So if you're doing a video about aspects and problems and then go on to talk about other problems that are stemmed from the first set, they are literally interlinked. So you can and should talk about the whole aspect rather than just going, well, you're not doing what I want you to do, which is I want you to focus on just my beliefs. It's like, well, okay, but she can make a video about her own opinions and what's important to her or what she thinks her audience are. If, as she said, that you liked the video for what she did at the beginning, but you just disagreed with the church burnings, as she is going to say, those are two of the same topic and two of the same coin. But even if they are two separate topics, you can have a video where you talk about two topics. You can hold and talk about those two topics. It's not hard.
Why not? And we need to, because we actually have an injustice happening today that we can talk and stop. And then the other ones, I mean, you say there's injustice happening today and the government are working on that. There are a lot of policies they put in place for healing, and maybe there are more we can discuss. But these church burnings are a problem happening right now. And I think it's really good that people are talking about them, especially when they bring in the conversation of the problems with residential schools as well. I cannot see what I've done wrong in discussing that. I also really want to point something out. When it comes to the church burnings, you seem really interested in ensuring we have found the culprits and ensuring we have proper convictions. Yet when it comes to the Catholic Church, you were just saying we should be outing the names of people who have been accused, not convicted. So why does your passion for justice and innocent until proven guilty exist for the church burnings, but not for the Catholic Church?
Sure. So that's not what I said. What I said was that should they release the records of the individuals who were involved in these churches, and whether or not those records show.
Accused.
Yeah, I said as in the records revolving around both the nuns and the priests who worked at those churches, those were records that the Catholic Church has not released. Whether or not those people turn out to be pedophiles is something that we can investigate, and whether or not those people will turn out to be criminals is another thing that we can talk about. The reason why I don't enjoy your particular brand of like pearl clutching when it comes to talking about these issues is that, yes, you did a half-decent job at acknowledging, which I was surprised to see, the residential school system and the treatment of Indigenous people. When you twist things around and then you take this as an opportunity to say, and now we need to talk about the real issue, which happens to be these Catholic churches that are burning down, you are then trying to take away from the national conversation, which should be about the treatment of Indigenous people.
I'm pretty sure that she didn't once, not even in her video, say we need to talk about the real issues of the church burning. I'm pretty sure that she would say this herself in a minute, but I'm pretty sure that she comes out and she says, well, no, I was given a reasoning why things were happening and what is happening today. So if you're saying that she did a really good job, or a surprise that she did such a good job of explaining what's going on with the history of it, the reservations and whatnot, the reservation schools, then go on to say, but then you tried to twist it and say that the churches are the most important thing. I don't think that she ever said that. I don't think she ever asserted that. I mean, these are one of those sort of things, Lance, that you should, back up.
To compare the treatment of Catholics in Canada to the treatment of Indigenous Canadians, where do you think they would stack up? If I was to compare the treatment of the average white Catholic Canadian to the experience of the average Indigenous Canadian, where do you think we would end up? Who needs more help and who needs more concern right now in terms of the way they're being systemically oppressed between those two classes?
You do realize
I wasn't comparing them.
Thank you, Lauren. You do realize that she wasn't actually comparing them. What she was actually doing was saying that these situations have occurred because of this, and we need to talk about both situations because they're interlinked.
I was giving history and context as to why the outrage and conversation was happening in
There we
Canada,
go.
and then discussing how two wrongs don't make a right.
And that's the
Like
result
that.
of what you do. Because when you set those terms up, when you put them in that context, when you make those kind of videos, when you just ask questions, that's what ends up happening. And whether you're doing it consciously, I'm not sure.
That's not what she was doing. She wasn't just asking questions, Lawrence. I keep on calling you Lawrence. It's because I have a friend, and he's very similar to what you're doing. He thinks that he knows the topics in which he's talking about. He thinks that he can hold the conversations, but 9 times out of 10, he doesn't even hear what he's actually talking about and responding to. So he just makes points that are semi-coherent, that are semi-relevant, but generally never actually picks up what's been said. And you're doing the same here. Lauren is saying that she's talking about the history, the context of the reasons why things are happening. And you're saying that, oh, well, she's asking questions and this is what you do so you can stop what's going on. It's like, no, that's your inference. You're inferring what she's doing. Now, you could be right, you could be wrong. But if she's telling you that she's doing this, now she could be wrong. She could be having a massive hissy fit, or she might be going out of her way to try and hide her true motives. How Hydra and all that type of stuff. I don't know. But generally, if she seems genuine as she does now, where she's saying, well, no, I'm trying to do a history and context of what's going on, and you're the one that's describing what she's doing, are you the one that's in the wrong for ascribing what you think she's doing, or is she in the wrong for telling you what she's doing? Just ask him, man. Just ask him.
I don't know if you're doing it consciously or perhaps you're doing it unconsciously. I'm not sure, but that is the end result of your work. And when you make those kind of videos,
What is?
when you juxtapose two things like that, two opposing ideas, you set them up on the same term.
She wasn't juxtaposing him. She was setting up the history context of what's going on today, the reasons why they could be justified in burning the churches, but in turn, as she's already said, trying to point out that two wrongs don't make a right. So she's gone heavily, and as you praised her for it, explained the reasons why things are happening, and then saying that two wrongs are not a right. That's not juxtaposing the two fucking points, you ignoramus.
You make videos about them, and then suddenly it's going to be justifiable to think, well, the moral outrage should shift from this horrifying atrocity that has occurred and is still ongoing to Indigenous Canadians into we should now talk about Catholic churches and the burning of them down. That is the problem with your particular brand of content.
I think, and I guess it's maybe just my audience, but my audience have the ability to juggle two ideas at the same time. And I can explain past atrocities and then say, here's also a present atrocity happening, and they can say, wow, those are both bad things. Like, I don't know about your audience, but can juggle two things at the same time without an issue.
And it's with design, because by doing that, by pushing.
So it's with design, talking about things that are interlinked and why things are happening and the context behind it. And the fact that two wrongs don't make a right, as she said, and explaining that burning down churches is bad and they shouldn't be doing it, but here's why. I'm literally losing brain cells. And it's not because of this.
In that narrative, they will be forced then to look at that and be like, well, you know what? I was a little bit upset about what was happening to Indigenous people, but I should be a lot more upset now at the Catholic churches that are burning down. Because
you shouldn't talk about the Catholic churches because it takes away from Indigenous issues.
You can talk about the Catholic churches. You should not juxtapose the two of them as if one is now going to be able to justify or.
I don't think you understand what juxtaposition means or juxtapose means, because from what Lauren's explained, that's not what she did. Providing context of why something is happening is not juxtaposing the two situations and comparing them. But, you know, I'm sure your inference is correct.
Accuse the other of being wrong.
That's not what I did, though. So how should I have made my video? Because what I did was I said, this is what happened at Indigenous residential schools. This is why it was bad, not a good thing. And then also there's this not a great thing happening today, and both things are bad, and we need to talk about it because it's happening right now. How should I have done that video differently? I feel like you're nitpicking and trying to find a problem with me because you didn't actually have an issue with that video, which is why you made up your issue in your response, which is that I was blaming natives, which I never did. Yep. Otherwise, you would have had an actual critique in your initial video.
Well, I can answer that question quite easily. The information, I find it interesting that we just glossed past the fact that these church burnings have actually been happening since long before the news was released. But in scouring through the information over the last probably 2 years, trying to find church burnings, causes, whether or not there were investigations performed, I found one that was particularly funny to me, which was it was a church that has burned in the same spot 3 separate times. It was the area where the priests keep the incense and the anointing oil, because for some reason, I don't know why, this particular group of priests is just not aware that you probably shouldn't have an open flame next to flammable oil. And so this is the 5th time that the fire department has been called out. So I would have liked to see you discuss, for example, why it is that Canadian churches seem to be exempt from fire codes or be aware that fire extinguishers have been invented.
That literally added nothing to the conversation at all. That is something that he's just Googled to try and focus on the fact of, well, the churches are not being burnt down by the left. And all he does is find one church that over a 50-year period was burnt down 2 to 3 times because of not putting oil or open flame near oil. And somehow that could be attributed to all other church built burnings, with the added aspect of churches having paint drawn on them to say 3 indigenous children, 275 or 215 and 716 and so on and so forth. But you know, it's obviously just those goddamn Catholics that are burning the churches down themselves. Like, even with the paint. You added nothing to the conversation.
That's fascinating.
That's fascinating, Tail. So your current assertion is that all the fucking churches that burn down in Canton priests, on top of being fucking pedos and fucking Native American beaters, are fucking dog shit at fucking fire safety. That's what you want to contribute to this fucking conversation right now?
I'm contributing to you the facts as they stand. If you have a problem with the facts as they stand, that's your problem.
I have problems with the fucking facts because you keep doing this meta conversation bullshit that has fucking nothing to do with what's going on. So tell me, because I am frustrated with you. What the fuck did you do in the conversation by saying that maybe Catholic priests are accidentally burning down their own churches? Is that a serious contention that Lauren and I are supposed to take on earnestly? Do you think that we need to go back to fucking google.com right now and be real quick and like be like, hey, what's the fucking fire codes of the fucking put out fucking fire safety priests for the priests? Like, what the fuck am I supposed to research with that information?
Are you asking me for tips?
No, I'm not, because I know you're shit posting and you're being an asshole for no fucking reason. Contribute to the fucking conversation or don't.
I'm identifying that church fires preceded any announcement of these graves. And your assertion repeatedly is that there is some sort of...
So hold the fuck up. So if I take a look... What? Fuck you taking my...
Connor, gotta let him at least finish if you want to respond to him. Okay. Tail, please finish.
I think Connor might need to take a break. But
do you want to finish? Okay.
I do this all the time, but...
Fine. I'm good.
Right. I'm sorry, but Connor can obviously handle himself on this one, but it's interesting to me that this is probably why he fucked up his Twitter. But it comes to a point where a tale of two rabbits is just going, well, you know, fires happened beforehand. It's like, yes. Well, Catholics could have set the fires beforehand because, you know, this is this one story that I found that has happened over 50 years, 3 times. And, you know, that could be for all churches. It's like, okay. So what about the paint and the reasons why it's spiked very recently? So the paint that the Catholics are now throwing on themselves and saying 3 indigenous children and the 215 and then 716 and whatnot. You added nothing. Like generally, like this is the paramount research that the indigenous archaeologist YouTuber has put into a debate in which he is obviously so entwined with, because you know he plays indigenous games. Did you know that he likes indigenous media? Did you know that he likes indigenous history? Did you know? Because I don't think he does.
You may proceed.
What?
It's obviously very important to you.
It
Hey,
is.
Connor, you can go on.
See, thank you for the dog bowl, Dylan. Ding ding. So fucking all right. So you said that these church burnings happened in the past as well. If I was to Google church burnings and look at it statistically, do you think I would see an increase over the past 2 years?
I have absolutely no idea.
Then what the fuck?
And that's the whole problem. That's the whole problem. If you have no idea if the increase has gone up or has gone down or has stayed relative, then you don't have an argument. All you're saying is, but what about, but what about, but what if, what could, what might. Where in actual fact, if you believed that this was just a level playing field that hasn't spiked, being the historian and archaeologist that you are, you individual YouTuber, then surely you would have actually done some research on that. Surely, you know, Googled it and gone, you're wrong. It's been exactly the same, or it hasn't gone up. But now you have admitted that you've done no research and you don't know, and all you're doing is going, what about?
Fuck are you talking about?
I would say probably. And come on, you don't have to be condescending in every single response you do to Tail. Come on.
He's not being condescending to every response because of Tao. He's being condescending because Tao threw in a point of, well, the fires have been happening beforehand, and it could be that they're setting fires themselves. I just think it's interesting that you're, you know, not dealing with this. He's literally doing what you're claiming that Lauren did. You know, he's asking questions. Yeah? No? All right, buddy.
I mean,
I want Tail to say something real.
I did, Connor. I said something real.
Okay, you said that
One of the
Catholic
church fathers
priests are
says-
burning down their own churches by being assholes and putting incense in the wrong spot. That's what I heard.
If you
Is that
have
your
a
real
problem with
contribution to this conversation?
If you have a problem with that fact, it is your problem to have. I'm
Okay, I have a
simply
problem with
telling
that
you.
fact.
Well, then that's your problem to have.
Okay.
Question: Are Catholic priests also putting paint on the front of their churches and beheading their statues? Paint that says "Fight for, you know, X progressive cause." I've literally seen the Serfs tweeting out stuff that says, you know, we were just indigenous children. Are the Catholic priests putting that up on their church walls? Are they the ones doing that graffiti? That's been an exponential growth the last few months.
I'm more than willing to acknowledge that there's plenty of things that have been happening over the last 3 or 5 or 10 years.
So no actual answer to that question, just a dodge. Yeah, I'm happy to admit that anything could have happened over the last 5 or 10 years.
That could be charted in any number of conceivable ways. But you haven't actually addressed what I said, which was
say it again.
these fires preceded the news.
Okay. Here, let me break this down for you really quickly. I was a former law enforcement officer, okay? We investigate things. When something picks up in a certain pattern, there's like one burglary in one area, and then it's just one burglary and then it happens. Okay, well, burglary happens, we try to investigate it. If we don't figure it out, then okay, whatever. If 20 burglaries occur in the same area within a month, there's probably a reason for it, so you can investigate it. And what I'm doing right now is I'm doing 1 + 1 = 2. And you're saying 1 is maybe a 0.5, so maybe it doesn't equal 2. And I have no idea what this adds to the conversation because we're literally light years ahead of where you're going.
This is not adding much to the conversation. Could we get back to the topic away from the fire incense theory?
Sure. Can I? Okay. I would like to ask a question from Serfs because basically I'm sure he could educate us and then we could have some contention.
Connor,
Yeah. Okay.
I just want to make one really
explain to me again, Lauren.
2 second point,
Woman,
I promise. You know what? I'm willing to concede that fires happened before all these fires that happen now, and maybe it's just the fires continuing. But assault and rape existed before the residential schools, so you never know. All right, Connor, go ahead.
No, I can address that again. Yes, yeah, no, but again, assault and rape can exist before the residential schools, but these were forced upon the children. That's a huge difference.
It's almost like the context is different, right?
Lauren's not saying, oh, well, they weren't forced onto them. She's pointing out the context of, well, if you're saying that no correlation actually matters, or the reasons why increases happen don't matter because they happened beforehand, then you don't have an argument. That's what she's saying. She obviously understands that there's a completely different context.
Okay,
yeah, and again, the same thing like Counterpoints brought up, right? He said there's rape that exists everywhere in society. It does. If you're forcing children to be in these institutions where 1 in 5 of them was getting sexually assaulted, then that is on you. That is on the Catholic Church. That is on the government of Canada.
Sure. Okay. So let's move the conversation forward because I would like to move forward instead of talking about incense burning. So basically what you were talking about, one of the major contentions that we were going to bring up tonight was whether or not the current actions of the Canadian government or the actions since 1996 constituted genocide. I watched your debate with Destiny. I liked it. I thought it was interesting. Oh, maybe it was a fan of yours. I'm sorry if I'm misattributing that to you.
Yeah, I was going to say.
It was a fan of yours. But the thing that I found most compelling was that I felt like a lot of the issues that were brought up while trying to support the term of genocide with evidence were paralleled in the American system with Black Americans, right? And so what I would say is from a progressive lens, most people wouldn't say that the United States government is trying to genocide Black Americans. They would say that there's systemic issues that disproportionately affect the Black community, screw them over policing, war on drugs, all that kind of shit. But I think only a few people would use genocide. You seemed pretty confident in your assertion of the word genocide, so I would like to get your description and your evidence and maybe push back against it a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so for the Articles of Genocide from the UN Convention, right? I'm pretty sure we all agree on transferring children from one group to another group. That's what the Canadian government has been involved with since the start of the residential schools. I mean, I believe that they kind of fall under most articles, causing serious bodily and mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. But the one that I'm sure we can all land upon and agree that Canada was committing was forcibly transferring children from one group to another group, right?
Sure. So let's say
you do realize that for the genocide to actually happen, that it's not just one aspect of that, right? Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that if you forcibly take somebody away from their culture, their area, their family, and force them into another group and you force them to learn your culture and everything, that's not a form of genocide. I think we call that cultural genocide, but that's not the same.
Lauren doesn't have to make this concession, but I'll make this concession. So there was a system to culturally genocide Native Canadians, Native Americans in Canada. But let's just say that even if it was considerably muted, it extended up until 1996. What about today? What about after 1996?
Sure.
Do you think constitutes genocide on behalf of the Canadian government?
Sure. So what occurred independently of the residential school system in Canada was something known as the 60 Scoop, which took place in about I believe 1967 onward, in which 20,000 Indigenous children were taken from their families, and they were actually carted into buses, and they were sold to families in both the UK and the US, which also would constitute child trafficking. They were sold in forms of the terms for adoption. They were sold, and they were often placed within white families, and once again lost their Indigenous culture, language, all that kind of stuff. Many of the 60 Scoop children have grown up, and they've come back to tell their stories. There's multiple survivors of this event, and they've come forward to say that, yes, I was sold into adoption under the Canadian government. That is bad. But what is more important is that today we have a system in which the federal government of Canada, and this is really something that is important to keep in mind, they are the ones that oversee all public services on the reserves for First Nations children, as well as First Nations education. That falls under the purview of the federal government. So they are the ones who have to fund the conditions necessary for child welfare. Now, if you want to take away all the reservation system in Canada, and if you didn't know already, the reserve system in Canada, which was enshrined into Canadian law under the Indian Act, basically took and placed a whole bunch of Indigenous cultures and put them into small spaces with horrible living conditions, oftentimes far away from, they were remote, they were away from Canadian society, they had a lot of difficulty, getting work and all that kind of stuff because of those conditions. Even if you want to erase all of that, when you take it forward to today, we live in a system now where we have an unbelievably high rate of Indigenous children in the foster care system. 50% of all the kids in the Canadian foster care system are Indigenous, despite being about 3% of the Canadian population. In Alberta, it's 73%, in Manitoba, it's 85%, and in Saskatchewan, it's 7%. Now, just for comparison, Canada has 1.1% of children in foster care compared to a country like Germany, which has 0.07%. Now, 2/3 of all the girls in foster care are abused, which is horrible.
Nobody disagrees.
In the foster care system, if they're Indigenous, are 4 times more likely to be sexually molested than if they're not. 60% of homeless youth, 1/3 of homeless adults were in the child care foster system. 91% of Indigenous female prisoners report having been physically or sexually abused. Women make up now 38% of prisoners in Canada. The majority of them were in the foster care system. Indigenous children make up 50% of all youth in correctional facilities. I could go on and on about all the ways these things permeate, but the difference would be, and this is one of the most comparable things I would say to someone who wants to compare this to, say, the Black American experience, is that these reserve systems were set up by the government of Canada. These reserve systems were set up and enshrined by the government of Canada, and so they set up.
Yeah, but just because they were set up by Canada, that doesn't mean that they set it up to be genocidal. That's look. I'm gonna say that bad things fucking happen, and for everybody that has done bad things should be prosecuted up to the highest fucking level. But these seems to be more of a systemic issue, as in government issues. This doesn't seem to be a case of it being a government instructed genocide. It just doesn't seem to be that way. Yes, there are fucking massive problems that need to be addressed, and I admit they need to be addressed. By definition, by absolutism, they need to be addressed. But I don't think that that constitutes a form of genocide. And I think that's the reason why people are pushing back against you more and more. But you could argue that's the reason why more and more people actually support you, because they hear the word genocide and assume that there's a genocide going on.
The conditions in which they would have to support and enable children in these conditions in order to be able to assure for their welfare. What ended up happening, and this is the reason why this is a huge problem, is they began to underfund these systems. They have underfunded them by about 30% in comparing to their non-Indigenous counterparts. In the case of Ontario, they've underfunded them.
Yeah, and that's absolutely horrible. But again, underfunding doesn't constitute, if true, the fact of it being a genocide. It's a systemic issue. You could even argue from a leftist perspective that this could arguably be the definition of systemic racism. The system is systematically choosing to neglect Indigenous people and Indigenous institutions that they hold and run themselves to have less than their white or Canadian counterparts. So you could quite easily argue that this clearly states the definition of systemic racism. But I don't think it constitutes the definition of genocide, my good man.
By about $400 million over the course of 5 years. So they are intentionally underfunding these systems that are then creating the poverty that is necessary for these kids to be justifiably taken from their parents in these systems.
Okay, so just so I can understand it descriptively, so I can try to understand your argument and wrap my head around it. So your argument is that we're only a generation away from the residential school system. The systemic issues that are basically inherent in the res system, basically like lack of material resources, lack of education, infrastructure, all that kind of stuff.
Lack of drinking water.
That causes broken families. Broken families are then contributing disproportionately to the foster care system, and then the foster care system is basically making it cyclical because they're producing fucked up adults that then in turn produce the cycle. And then my question is, because basically I think a lot of these arguments, while still fucked up, are analogous to our own perception of our foster care system inside the United States. The question that I have is, are you saying it's genocide because then it fits under that like UN subsection where it's the forcible removal of children, and it's kind of like this multivariable cycle that you're seeing? Is that why you're calling it genocide, or is there another reason?
Okay, so for me to make the assertion that this is still continuously ongoing cultural genocide, I would have to use the reference again. We've been speaking about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission multiple times.
Notice how Weasley he is there. I missed it on the actual time. But for me to insinuate that this is still cultural genocide, so he's already walked back on the definition of this is genocide, and now walked back to this is cultural genocide, which is something completely different. And I actually think most people would agree that it's a form of cultural genocide where you're forcibly stripping away somebody's culture. I think you could all agree with that. But notice how he walked it back. It's no longer genocide. I think we could constitute this as cultural genocide. So let's see how this goes.
There's also the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women report that came out that asserted the exact same thing, as well as the UN Human Rights Council that said that this is an ongoing crisis that tantamounts to genocide. Amnesty International.
Tantamounts isn't genocide.
National has come out and declared the same terms in no uncertain words. It's not simply that they are intentionally, because they are intentionally underfunding these programs that is then creating this revolving door system. They are also specifically adopting indigenous.
Yeah, it really sounds like systemic racism. It really sounds like systemic issues.
Children at a higher rate, despite the numbers. So if I am to compare indigenous children to non-indigenous children and the rates and the reasons why they are abducted for the adoption program, If you were to look at every single metric, non-Indigenous parents commit other atrocities such as physical abuse at a much higher rate than non-Indigenous parents. So for non-Indigenous parents, physical abuse occurs at 23% of the cases in which the kids are taken. In Indigenous families, it's only 9%. The same occurs for sexual abuse, emotional maltreatment, exposure to intimate partner violence. All of those across the board are either equal to or higher than with non-Indigenous families. The exception to the rule, and the only reason why Indigenous kids are apparently taken from their families at a much higher rate, is neglect. And neglect only registers at 16 points higher than non-Indigenous kids. So one of the biggest problems we have here is neglect as a broad term for being able to take these children away from their families is typically for a handful of reasons related to their living conditions. Their living conditions, which again are under the purview, especially when it comes to child welfare, of the federal government of Canada, who is intentionally paying them much lower rates than they are other families. They are creating the conditions in which this is occurring. Now this...
I don't actually have any contention to this. It just sounds like this is systemic racism by the actual definition. It doesn't sound like it's a genocide. I mean, if anybody wants to correct me, then please do. But it really sounds like this is systemic racism. I mean, a clear and obvious definition of systemic racism. This is a government that has created a system that is particularly apparently going out of its way to make sure that one class of people is getting better treatment than the other class of people, surely based on their race or the ethnicity. It's literally the definition of systemic racism. But it's not a genocide.
By the way, is not in and of itself. I wouldn't just walk away from this and be like, you know, and then I fucking done it. This is, again, one of many things that would be characterized in, say, if we were to look at the Truth and Reconciliation report or any of the number of other reports that have come out, even the Royal Commission that came out in 1996, this is one of the biggest critical factors. If you look at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which has stated that this is a genocide and that it is ongoing, they set out a whole bunch of calls to action specifically to address the fact that this is something that is ongoing and we need to stop this. And like you said, it was groundbreaking. I completely agree. I mean, it started in 2008 only because of a lawsuit cost $100 million, but their findings are critical. And the top numbers, if you read all the calls to action in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the top numbers all talk about child welfare. They're the most important things to them because they are the ones that are critical for this ongoing process.
Do you mind if I jump in? All right. You were just mentioning, and I really have to look at the data, that within Indigenous families, at least in adoption, that the rates of abuse are lower, correct?
It depends on which categories, but for nearly every single category, for non-Aboriginal children, for physical abuse, it's higher. For sexual abuse, it's higher. For emotional maltreatment, it's the same. And for exposure to intimate partner violence, it's higher. All for non-Aboriginal families. The only higher is neglect.
Okay, so first of all, I want to agree with you that the foster system is deeply messed up. You know, I've had family that have experienced it, even just as non-Indigenous, and almost died in it, right? It's a mess.
So already another concession. Like, considering that she's supposed to be this Nazi queen that everybody's so scared of because she's so dangerous. Now, again, I'm not taking anything away from what she's done in the past, as in stopping immigrants from being able to land on particular soil and so on and so forth. I'm not trying to take that away. I'm just saying, for someone that's supposed to be so dangerous, that shouldn't be platformed, apparently, now that they're actually having a conversation, she still seems to be making concessions and agreeing with points that Lance is making. For somebody that's supposed to be this horrible Nazi queen that should never be platformed because she's so horrid, and I don't see, at least in this conversation, like if you take it out of context and just have this as its own situation, I don't see how she's doing that badly. Like, generally, and again, as I said before, I don't fucking like her. I just like to try and treat people honestly rather than judging them on what they have or what they haven't done. Simply because if you believe in a form of restorative justice or prisoner reform, for instance, or you know, just reform in general, or criminal reform, then surely if you believe that literal murderers and rapists can be reformed, if you believe that, which a lot of people on the left do, and you know, there's science out there to prove that it does work, then why would you not hold that out for people that just think differently to you? It's just a really interesting question that I wanted to pose to people. If you wanted to message me, then please do. I think that my Twitter is somewhere at the top of the chat, so to speak, and it's also in my about page and on the main screen. So if you wanted to message me, please do. But with that being said, let's carry on. We only have around about 17 minutes left.
messed up system. It needs help in all regards. And if there is underfunding for Indigenous children in the system, that's something I'd absolutely support fixing. Now, is there a disparity, and you may have the data on this, is there a disparity in the amount of Indigenous kids versus non-Indigenous kids that are removed from their homes in the first place?
Yeah, it's overwhelmingly Indigenous kids.
And so, like, if I read the CBC or I go online, you can see, and I mean, you can disagree with this if you want, they'll talk about how there's higher drug use in these communities, higher incest and rape, neglect, these things in general. And this is not talking about just the foster care families, this is talking about the general population. And they say that it is because of the legacy of the residential school and things that they were taught while they were there, perhaps. But wouldn't it follow that if these things are happening in the community, that is why more kids are being put in the foster system? And I just, like, does that follow to you?
Yeah, so what you're trying to do is lay blame directly on, I guess, parents for their drug use.
No, I'm not trying to lay blame. I'm just trying to sort out why this is happening so that we can have a conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. You're just asking questions. And in this case, it would be the overwhelming reason why they are being taken.
Yeah, this is a debate. She's asking you questions on what's going on, what the data is, what do you think is the best way of going forward. She's not just asking questions in the way that you're trying to suggest, where she's like trying to throw things. Though she could be. I may be wrong. She could do. But it seems more of a case of she's trying to understand your point more than it being a case of, trying to throw your point out. I mean, that's just my opinion.
From the families, again, falls under neglect. Now, neglect can include parents who are using drugs. Neglect can include that. There's a number of reasons why they are taken from their families. In terms of the conditions on these reserves, and in terms of the conditions as to why they're, like, you have to understand these are deplorable environments. And yes, a lot of these people came back from the residential school system, and this has permeated the cycle of abuse. But these are also areas, there's 54 reserves, and this falls, again, under the government of Canada, that don't have drinking water. They don't have potable drinking water. Like, the very essence of life, and I'm not trying to become emotional or anything here, try to appeal to emotion, but I'm saying that is critical.
Most of change, you've been doing that all the way through. But I think anybody could make a concession that if anybody is anywhere and any community has anything, one of the first things they should fucking have is water. I don't think anybody's going to disagree with you on that one, Lance.
Aspect of living in these environments. And that is why this may perpetuate and create conditions in which you will find families who are broken. In addition to, many of these families have also been given ultimatums in which, if you wish to receive treatment, if you wish to receive any kind of, let's just say, compensation, if you wish to receive financial aid, you may have to put up your children for adoption in order to receive that money. That was something else that came out of commission. So I don't know how else to explain this other than a lot of this does fall under, like, you can chalk up a handful of this as personal responsibility, and I'm not going to try and absolve anyone from personal responsibility. That's not
like, again, I'm not trying to take anything away from what the Serfs have said, because I think he's made, in this section at least, he's made some good points. I think they've been really coherent. They've been a case of there are proper systemic problems that definitely exist, that definitely need to be addressed. But that's what they are. They're systemic problems. They are not genocide. And I think that's where the difference is. I think if activists were to come out of their way to say that, well, these are the actual problems, I think you'd be able to reach across the aisles. I think Destiny put it at best when reviewing this. It comes to the point where don't start off with a lie. Start off with your points. Because in this debate, people, especially that are apparently the right-wing Nazis that follow Lauren, and I'm sure that there are many, I'm just saying in general, the right-wing Nazis are going to look at this and go, well, you didn't prove genocide, you didn't prove mass graves, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, and then completely and utterly forget that you've made so many decent points towards the end. So rather than leading with your lies, or rather than dealing with the hyperbole that you want to try and grab people's attention with, maybe it's better off to start off with the actual facts that you do have, because they're already bad enough as it is. But that's just my opinion, and I'm mirroring that from Destiny.
My purpose here, I'm trying to say how much is the government of Canada themselves accountable in this equation. And if the government of Canada...
Yeah, nobody disagrees. I think that the government is accountable. After all, they're the ones that are dictating what they can and cannot do, where the funding goes, if they can get the money that is allotted to them. I think most people will agree that there's a systemic issue there. Is it genocide, though?
Canada, and things like, again, clean drinking water is responsible on behalf of the government of Canada. It was a promise made by Justin Trudeau. He said he would fix that, and we still have 54 different reserves that don't even have clean drinking water. Then that falls under them. If they're intentionally withdrawing or withholding or suing families in order to withhold the money that is owed to them to help their child welfare, that is on the government of Canada.
Agreed.
Sorry, counterpoints.
Yeah, counterpoints. You are. You can go.
Yeah, so this is actually where, listen, I'm not like the other girls, okay? I'm an enlightened centrist. So this is where I seriously think that the right and left could come together. And I hate to say that, but I'm going to, even though this is a debate. So when you're talking about conservative values, conservative Christian values, I know that makes some people catch on fire and cringe to death and all that kind of stuff. Oftentimes, one of the primary things that's emphasized is strong families. Strong families come from a strong environment. So if you literally, like at least for me, if I was arguing with conservatives, I would say, listen, you're born through no fault of your own. Your parents are addicted to drugs. You don't have access to good food, good water, good education, good anything. And then it's basically up to you to bootstrap. Now, can you bootstrap? Sure. Everybody, some people are fucking Ben Carson, right? They can become a neurosurgeon despite thinking that like grain was stored in the fucking pyramids or some shit like that, right? Some people can bootstrap, but some people can't. And then on top of that, shitty conditions basically decreases your ability to bootstrap. So for me, what I would say is there's variables that we can control, there's variables that we can't, and we have to control the variables that we can't. But what I would want, because basically what maybe genocide for me is too strong of a term, maybe that grants some immediacy to the issue that allows it to be addressed politically. But at the same time, like I see this shit not as a single generational project. I see this as like a century-long project, literally. And by that I mean making schools that aren't dog shit, early education, and then basically raising productive adults. Now, my definition of productive is probably way different than anybody on the left, but at the same time, like that's where I think there's a real opportunity here. The reason why I think I came into this conversation pretty strong and I was like, fuck yeah, let me do this conversation, is because when I hear that we have like fucked up systems, not enough water, not enough food, not good education, I don't think genocide. Now, whether or not we can move past that shit and just start focusing on solutions instead of calling each other assholes, I don't know. Like calling each other assholes on twitch.tv is fucking fun. I love it. But at the same time, like, I don't know, strong families make strong children make strong families.
Or at least that's what it should
question.
be.
Oh, sorry, Dylan.
Quick, yeah, but I do want to say we are speeding towards the end. We have about 5 minutes left until where the conversation was listed to end. So I just wanted to ask the room if you wanted to end it here or if you wanted to keep it going. I could go for maybe another 10 minutes max.
Yeah, I need to wrap up soon too.
So if I could just add two things, I guess I spent too much time talking.
Can we do it in closing, or do you think we can? Would that be difficult? Or
sure. Well, our closing statements are only about 2 minutes.
I'll give about 5. I'll give 5 minutes left since we.
Okay, all right.
I'll have you go and I'll have Lauren go. Lauren, you were gonna go first, so Lauren then Serfs. Sound good? Okay.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. Yeah, I first wanted to mention I do not think a lack of clean drinking water leads to parents having sex with their kids, and that is a larger problem that we're going to have to address.
So after all the concessions and being a genuinely respectable-ish debate from Lauren, low blow, literally low blow, just low blow, just there's no need, no need on that one. That's just yeah.
That can't be addressed just, okay, give people money, fix the infrastructure in a town, right? Yeah, we can all agree that fixing the infrastructure is good, but this also brings up a whole opens a can of worms of there are people in the Indigenous community in Canada who don't even want to be a part of the laws of Canada, who feel that's an aspect of cultural genocide, who feel that the government having any sort of decisions on their land is a part of cultural genocide. So then
she has a point that if the thing is with governments is that if you want a certain amount of money, you generally have to pay a certain amount of taxes. So if you're in a more affluent area, your property tax is generally higher. And because your property tax is generally higher, generally your schools are better. And maybe that shouldn't be the way that it is. Maybe it should be more of a federalized system where if you have higher taxes in one area, those taxes can be spread to lower areas. Maybe. I think that's personally what I would do as a solution. But that's neither here or here for that conversation. It comes down to, she's correct that some people would classify that as a cultural genocide, but it comes to the point of, well, you have to acquiesce to some aspects. Now, does that mean that you have to completely and utterly give up the whole of your culture and the whole of your indigenous ways? No. Does that mean that you may have to pay some taxes and maybe send your kids to a sort of a state school where you also educate your child about your own culture and maybe integration of the two? Probably. I think that's just the way that governments are, especially when you're in the certain countries. Is that the best way of dealing with things? Maybe not. But that's the issue that you kind of have to try and find a kind of a seesaw to. You can't give too much, otherwise the other end gets drowned. But you can't take too much, otherwise everything's now against you. So it's kind of trying to balance it. It's a balancing act of what you give to the government and what the government gives back to you. So she does make a good point about they would also classify it as cultural genocide, so to speak, or cultural appropriation or whatever. But yeah, it's one of those things that has to be worked out between the actual reservations themselves and the communities within it.
Balance this issue with, okay, you also need to build the infrastructure here, you also need to ensure the conditions are good on our land, but also we don't want to be a part of Canada. That creates a really difficult contention and problem we're dealing with here. And of course, we're not going to have time for it in this debate here, but I do think that is something that should be considered.
Lance?
So I just want to quickly say counterpoints.
Just to say that I personally think that Lance is a little bit spineless, saying all the stuff that he's about to say now.
If you have more interest in this, because I think you do have productive interest in this topic, I would recommend also checking out the inquiry into the murder of missing Indigenous women, which speaks pretty highly also to the eugenics program that was instilled in Canada and the forced sterilization that is still occurring to Indigenous women today. As recently as 2018, nearly 100 women, I believe, in Saskatchewan, or no, 100 women over the last decade, but I think 18 women in Saskatchewan have begun lawsuits against the provincial government's healthcare program for experiencing forced sterilization. There has been numerous cases across this country of this occurring, and specifically occurring in much higher rates to Indigenous women, typically under the guise of them not being mentally sound or mentally fit, and often under duress in that they cannot receive their own children after being born unless they sign away the rights to be forcibly sterilized. So that's one of the aspects of it that will be present, obviously, in the murder and missing Indigenous women document. There's a number of other reasons, though. I mean, I didn't have the time to get into it now, but the conditions that are being set up in these reserves that are being perpetuated, the fact that the government of Canada did not even want to give money in return to these reserves because they were dramatically underfunding it until like class action lawsuit was taken up by Cindy Blackstock, which ended up rewarding, I believe, close to like $2 billion, which the government of Canada is still fighting in court to try and withdraw them from having. This is like, there's so many things that once you stack them upon each other, it's the reason why it's not just myself. You know, this is again something that has been recognized by Amnesty International, the UN Human Rights Panel, and again, one of the last things I'll say on this, especially regarding the forced sterilization of women, the International Conference of the United Nations Human Rights Commission held in Montreal stated in March 1999 that Canada is in violation of international law in its treatment of Aboriginal people, and that the condition of natives is the most pressing human right issue to Canadians. It is tantamount to their genocide. So,
again, tantamount doesn't. Yeah, just yeah.
Okay, so we're now going to go into closing statements and shout outs. Please do shout yourself out in your closing statements. Thank you all for attending tonight's conversation. I appreciate your well-being. Sorry for all my viewers on my side about the stream crashing. You know, things happen. It's probably the Canadian CIA. You know how it works.
It's
is that what it's called? CSIS?
It's called CSIS. Everything's over.
Wow, including the debates. Now we're going to throw it over to Connor.
Yeah, my name is Connor. I run a YouTube channel named Counterpoints. I'm a center right, law enforcement veteran, Marine Corps veteran, science fiction, religion, and philosophy nerd. I do like debates like this. Sorry to Tale of Twin Rabbit for being a dick, but sorry you frustrated me a little bit. And then basically, I know everybody was expecting a fucking bloodbath, and maybe we failed that a little bit. But that's because, like, I don't know, I give a shit. We're talking about people who are being, like, ultimately at the end of the day, regardless of whether or not we call it genocide, we're talking about people who were raped and murdered. We were talking about kids who ran away from their homes and died of exposure. All this shit is fucked up. So we can talk about the reason why I wanted to enforce descriptive reality is because I've said this before, I'll say this again, is some of the way this stuff is portrayed, I would be probably acting not in the most rational way possible. The reason why I want to nail down descriptive reality of the past, the reason why I want to nail down descriptive reality of the present, is because I think accurate descriptive reality can get you to better prescriptive solutions. So maybe we can talk about that another time. I sincerely appreciate y'all, and I wish you all well.
Okay, now I'm going to throw it over to Lauren Sutton.
Yeah, for sure. First of all, Dylan, I know it's a bit controversial. So, firstly, to assert that there is a genocide,
which I don't see
there
why.
were mass graves found. Out of all of the graves that were allegedly found that have been in the media the last few months, not a single body has been exhumed. Not one. And even so, this doesn't mean they aren't necessarily graves or a graveyard. But all the chiefs in these communities have stated these are not mass graves if they do exist, and they do know about them. The 751 graves found, the Cowessess band, Chief Cadmus Delorme, emphasized that the findings were not from a mass grave, but unmarked graves. The band leader in Kelowna said it was not a mass grave for the 215 graves found there, or potentially. The GPR researchers that did this research said nothing is confirmed until things are dug up. Yet progressive activists and media continue to make the claim of mass graves, and so do our debate opponents, exaggerating what were some potentially absolutely horrific things that happened in the past. And we need to be honest about what has occurred to have a proper conversation while not exaggerating. And unfortunately, this exaggeration has led to legitimate hate crimes and destruction today, and that is unfortunate, and especially unfortunate that people are making excuses for it.
Okay, now I'm going to throw it over to Tale of Two Rabbits.
Thank you very much. I don't know, I'm unclear. Academics, historians, indigenous nations, government agencies, they've been open about this genocide for decades. The Truth and Reconciliation Report was issued 6 years ago. The concession was made that these fires aren't somehow all a conspiracy of Antifa. The concession was made that mass graves are being identified and require further research. The conceit was made that the foster care system is absolutely toxic, and therefore the removal policy was unacceptable. And in response, I got rhetorical tactics and a fair amount of shouting because this was fun. Fully mature people learn from their mistakes and move forward. Fully mature people own up to their past. Fully mature people acknowledge that sometimes a priest
is that why you privated your
church,
Twitter
rather than scream at the person who says that it happened. When members of my community learned that I'd agreed to participate in this, they were appalled. I hope they now at least kind of partially understand why I did.
No, because you added fuck all to the conversation, which is why you privated your Twitter. You added absolutely nothing while trying to give yourself off as this absolute fountain of knowledge. You're an indigenous gameplay. You're an indigenous media hound. You go over the history of an indigenous people, both for the north and the south of the border. You follow the archaeology of the indigenous peoples. But yeah, you didn't know what GPR was. You didn't know who did the GPR. You didn't know that they don't find actual bodies. They find impressions of what grave sites may or may not be. You then didn't understand other aspects of what happens when situations occur and where spikes will happen after that situation occurred. It's absolutely amazing to me that you have sat there, said sweet fuck all, contributed fuck all to the conversation, but yet you have apparently the most to gain out of this, the most to push, the person who would put the most into this, and you offered the least. Now, it's not very often I say this, but to be fair, I've said it actually quite a bit in this review, but you're worse than a flat earther for your dishonesty. You dodged. You added fuck all to the conversation by saying, well, you know, churches could be burnt down by Catholics. It's like, okay, they could, but then what about all the other aspects and evidence that goes with it? You let's put it this way. I would hate to talk to you, and I talk to everyone. Let's finish off. Everybody be really happy very, very shortly because Lance and Lauren have a little bit of a lover's tiff. So let's watch that.
Okay. Before we throw it over to Lance to wrap it up, I just want to let everybody know that tomorrow we have the Hippie Dippy Roundtable on my show for this Friday. And next week, I had to reschedule due to today's technical difficulties my review of Tariq Nasheed's new movie, Buckbreaking, with Your Movie Sucks, which should be happening hopefully some point next week. Now I'm going to throw it over to Lance to wrap it up.
Yeah, I don't think there could be any restorative justice as long as the people responsible aren't taking claims for the actions they've done. If I could use...
Guilty people are not going to take claim for what they've done. People that have raped, molested, tortured, which they obviously have done throughout the ages, are not going to step forward and go, yeah, sorry, boss, it was me. You're going to have to prove the fact that these people did that. They're not going to step forward. The people like Lauren and Counterpoints that said that they don't want to release names on witch hunts is simply because you have to prove somebody guilty, not prove that they're innocent. Doing it the way that you suggested is trying to prove your innocence and doing it in reverse. That's not how the justice system works. But yeah, let's carry on.
Similarly, it's kind of like you were in Southern, because ultimately, if you had spent your career rising to become one of the darling children of the alt-right, palling around with people like Brittany Pettibone, Richard Spencer, touring around the globe with someone like, let's say, Stefan Molyneux, who is well known for measuring the skulls of black and white people, spreading the Great Replacement conspiracy, spreading the Great Genocide conspiracy theory, then going on tour, spreading both of those conspiracy theories, in addition to going to join that far-right nationalist group, First Europa, and then joining them by shooting flares at immigrants, and doing all of this while at the same time all of it bubbles over and boils over to the point where, at the end of the day, you ultimately led to one of the people contributing towards the Christchurch shooting, who declared that the Great Replacement theory was one of the reasons why they committed the atrocity that they did. Afterwards, you then took everything back.
Pussy. You fucking pussy. Bringing this all up at the end so I don't have a chance for response.
You can respond. I'm more than glad. More than glad. More than glad. I would love. Please.
Wait, wait. You can respond, but let me be clear. I am not going to be part of it. If you want to make this do a fucking shit show, I'm leaving, and I will not contribute to that because that's the type of brand I want to produce. Do you both understand that? Okay, Lance, finish, and then I'm out. You two can fucking eat each other alive if you want.
Sounds good.
Lance, you gonna finish?
Yeah, I'll finish. And then turning the whole thing around to suddenly say that you're going to rebrand yourself as this wonderful new centrist and everything's wonderful and that you write children's books now and it's all uwu and everything's good now and nothing bad ever happened. I think if you wanted to achieve restorative justice when it came all of this stuff, then what you had to do was simply acknowledge any of the bad things you've done in the past, but you haven't. So I don't think the idea of you now doing this rebranding tour is anything more than you just seen the writing on the wall. That's ultimately what this all is. You knew what was happening to your peers, and you were smart enough and astute enough to walk away from it.
You're such a bitch, Lance.
Okay.
Bring it up. Let's go. Stop to me. I'm staying right here. I'm not going anywhere.
Throw 7,000 accusations at me and then ask me to respond to them. That's great. Connor and I are going to have a chat with my chat. And if you want to not be a bitch boy and have a full conversation another time, we can do that. We'll arrange that.
Okay. You all have a pleasant afternoon.
I'm right here, Lauren. You don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to go talk to Connor.
Right. So, as you can see, ladies and gentlemen, however you may identify, that's it. That's the end of the debate. It's only taken us about 3.5 hours to be able to get through it. That means for me, it's coming up to around about 9:30. I'm a little bit spent, but I'm absolutely happy that we were able to do this. I'm absolutely happy that we were able to, enjoy this, get it done, that sort of stuff. I think it's really important because with all the stuff that come from Lauren debating, everybody was so hyper focused on like Lauren Southern that it comes to more of an issue for me that the issue of the debate was kind of lost. More people were talking about Lauren Southern's participation in the debate rather than the debate. Now, if you actually have the issue of trying to suggest that there is an actual genocide, maybe don't convolute the waters by trying to suggest that Lauren Southern shouldn't be platformed and that's the true discussion of what's going on. Maybe actually just debate. Maybe, just trying to say it. With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, and however you may identify, I am going to bid you farewell. I'm going to bid you adieu. And thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me, for all the people that did. If you did like the stream, did like the video, please like and share it. Try and get it shared around. But I bid you farewell. I bid you adieu. And I'll see you all again real soon. Bye-bye for now.